This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I don't think I've ever written this all down before. It's been almost 7 years, but sometimes I still wake up in cold sweats, hearing the sound of metal crunching and glass shattering. I can still smell the blood. I grew up in Pinewood, a little speck on the map in rural Tennessee, where everyone knows your business before you do. My dad was mostly just a name to me. He's been in and out of Riverbend Maximum Security Institution since I was 3. Armed robbery, assault, parole violations, you name it. Around town, having the last name Tanner was like wearing a sign that said, trouble. My cousin Dwayne had his trailer raided by the sheriff's department 3 separate times for cooking meth. My uncles were always getting hauled in for drunk and disorderly, or fighting at the Rusty Nail Bar out on Route 16. So you can probably guess how I was raised to feel about cops. By 16, I was doing what bored, poor kids in forgotten towns do, drinking whatever booze we could get our hands on, breaking into abandoned buildings, and running from the law whenever those blue lights flashed. It was almost a game to us. The adults in my life had taught me that cops were the enemy, and I believed them. Cade Winters had been my best friend since 3rd grade. We'd both grown up rough, but Cade always had this wild energy about him that I envied. He was fearless in a way that seemed almost stupid sometimes, but we all followed him anyway. That Saturday night in June started like any other. Cade had swiped a bottle of Jack Daniels from his stepdad's liquor cabinet, and we were headed out to the old Satterfield factory that had closed down years ago. There were 4 of us crammed into Cade's beat-up 1998 Chevy Cavalier. Me, Cade, Ryan in the back, and Jessie, this girl Ryan had been trying to hook up with for weeks. The windows were down, radio blasting some Florida Georgia Line song, and the bottle was getting passed around. I remember taking a long swig, the whiskey burning my throat, when Cade cranked the volume even louder. "Damn, Jake! You see Harmon's face when we tore through his cornfield last weekend," Cade shouted over the music, taking his eyes off the road to look at me. His pupils were huge, and he'd already downed more whiskey than the rest of us combined. "Man, keep your eyes on the damn road," I laughed, but I wasn't really worried. We'd done this 100 times before. The night was pitch black on that backcountry road, no streetlights, just stars overhead, and the occasional porch light from a distant farmhouse. We were probably doing 60 or 70 on a road marked for 35. But out there, who was going to stop us? I remember glancing at the time on the dashboard, 11:42 p.m. I remember because those green digital numbers were the last thing I saw before everything went to hell. The impact came out of nowhere, a deafening crash, and then this weird silence for maybe half a second before the world started rolling. Later I found out we'd hit a massive buck that had jumped onto the road, but in that moment all I knew was chaos. The car flipped once, twice, I lost count, the roof caving in, glass exploding around us. The seatbelt cut into my chest so hard I couldn't breathe. When the car finally stopped, it was upside down in a ditch. My ears were ringing, and something warm was running down my face. I touched it and saw blood on my fingers, but weirdly, I couldn't feel any pain. The adrenaline, the shock, the alcohol, whatever it was like I was watching everything happen to someone else. "Cade?" I called out, my voice sounding strange and distant. No answer. That's when I realized the driver's seat was empty. The windshield was completely gone, and so was Cade. I fumbled with my seatbelt, managing to hit the release. I fell awkwardly onto the roof of the car, cutting my arm on broken glass. From the back seat I could hear Jesse crying and Ryan groaning. I kicked at my door until it finally gave way, crawling out into the wet grass and cool night air. "Cade!" I screamed, stumbling to my feet. That's when I saw him. He was lying about 15 feet from the car, completely still. Even in the dark, I could see the weird angle of his leg and the dark stain spreading underneath him. I ran to him, tripping and falling to my knees beside him. "Cade! Hey, Cade, wake up, man," I said, shaking his shoulder. His face was covered in blood, flowing from a huge gash on his forehead. His eyes were closed, and he wasn't moving, not even a little bit. "No, no, no," I kept saying over and over. I yanked my t-shirt off and pressed it against the wound on his head, but it soaked through almost immediately. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely keep pressure on it. "Cade, come on, wake up." Behind me I heard Ryan's voice. "Holy shit, Jake, is he?" I turned to see Ryan limping toward us, his face pale in the moonlight. His jeans were torn and I could see bone sticking through the skin of his lower leg. But he was standing, hobbling over to us. "Call 911, I shouted. "Hurry!" Ryan reached into his pocket with a shaking hand and pulled out his phone. By some miracle, it wasn't broken. He handed it to me, his eyes fixed on Cade's motionless body. I can't look at him," Ryan whispered, turning away and vomiting into the grass. With bloody fingers, I dialed 911, leaving red smears on the screen. When the dispatcher answered, I was barely coherent. "There's been an accident. My friend, he's not moving, and there's so much blood. Please help us." I gave them the best description I could of where we were. Somewhere on Old Miller Road, near the Satterfield factory. The whole time, I kept my other hand on Cade's chest, desperately trying to feel if he was breathing. I couldn't tell. "Jake, is Jesse okay?" Ryan asked, his voice tight with pain as he lowered himself to sit on the ground. Shit, I'd forgotten about Jessie. I don't know, she's still in the car. Keeping the bloody shirt pressed against Cade's head, I shouted toward the overturned vehicle. "Jessie, can you hear me?" A weak voice called back. "I'm stuck. My arm is caught." I looked between Cade and the car, torn about what to do. I couldn't leave Cade, but Jessie needed help too. Headlights suddenly illuminated the scene as a vehicle approached and slowed to a stop. For a split second, I thought about running. It was instinct. Blue lights meant trouble. But I couldn't leave Cade. A police cruiser pulled up and a tall officer got out, flashlights sweeping across the wreckage. When the beam hit Cade's body and me kneeling next to him, the officer started running. "What happened here?" he demanded, kneeling down opposite me. "We hit something. A deer, I think." Cade wasn't wearing his seatbelt. He got thrown out. I was crying now, the numbness starting to wear off as pain set in from my own injuries. "Please help him." The officer, his nameplate said Mitchell, immediately checked Cade's pulse, then looked at me with an intensity that made my stomach drop. "He's in cardiac arrest. I need you to move back now." I expected him to handcuff me, to shout at me about drinking, about being underage, about speeding. That's what cops did to people like me. Instead, Officer Mitchell started CPR, hard, rhythmic compressions on Cade's chest that looked brutal but methodical. "There's a girl trapped in the car," I managed to say between sobs. Without stopping compressions, Mitchell called into his radio for backup and an ambulance. Then he looked at me. "Can you stand? Are you hurt badly?" I shook my head. "I'm okay. Just cuts." "Good. I need you to go help your friend in the car. Talk to her. Keep her calm. Don't try to move her if she's trapped. Just be with her until fire rescue gets here." I hesitated, not wanting to leave Cade. "Go," Mitchell said firmly. "I've got him. I won't stop until the paramedics take over. I promise." Something in his voice made me believe him. I stumbled to my feet and made my way back to the car, where I found Jessie crying, her arm pinned between the collapsed roof and the seat. Ryan had managed to get back to the car too, and was sitting on the ground beside it, holding his mangled leg. "The cop's helping Cade," I told them, kneeling down to see Jessie through the broken window. "Ambulance is coming." "We're so screwed," Ryan muttered. "We're all going to jail." I didn't answer. All I could think about was Cade lying there, not moving, not breathing, while a cop, the enemy, was fighting to save his life. I heard sirens in the distance, growing louder. I went back to check on Cade and Officer Mitchell. The cop was still doing compressions, sweating now, his uniform sticking to him in the humid night air. "Come on, kid," he was saying between counts. "Come on." I stood there, useless, watching Mitchell work. Then suddenly Cade made a gasping sound, his body jerking. Mitchell quickly turned him onto his side as Cade started to cough. "He's breathing," Mitchell announced, relief evident in his voice. "He's back." The ambulances and fire trucks arrived moments later, the scene exploding into controlled chaos of flashing lights and urgent voices. Paramedics swarmed around Cade, getting him onto a backboard and into an ambulance. Another team worked to free Jessie from the car, while a third looked at Ryan's leg. Someone put a blanket around my shoulders and sat me down on the bumper of an ambulance to clean the cuts on my face. I was shivering despite the warm June night. That's when Officer Mitchell came over to me, his uniform covered in Cade's blood. I flinched, expecting the lecture, the handcuffs, the trip to juvenile detention that I probably deserved. Instead, he sat down next to me. "Your friend is stable for now. They're taking him to regional. They'll need to notify his parents. And yours." I nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "I can smell the alcohol on all of you," he continued, his voice surprisingly gentle. "You're lucky to be alive, all of you. Are you—" I swallowed hard. "Are you arresting us?" Mitchell sighed, looking out at the wrecked car being winched onto a tow truck. "Right now, I'm more concerned about getting you kids proper medical attention. We'll deal with the rest later." After we were all checked out, Jessie had a broken arm, Ryan needed surgery on his leg, and I had a dozen stitches in my face and arm. Mitchell surprised me again. Instead of calling my mom to come get me from the hospital or taking me to the station, he offered me a ride home himself. The drive was quiet at first. I stared out the window, still in shock from everything that had happened. I kept seeing Cade's bloody face every time I closed my eyes. "How long you been drinking, Jake?" Mitchell asked suddenly. I tensed up. Here it came. "A while," I admitted. "And running from cops? Breaking into places you shouldn't be? I've heard about you and your friends." Of course he had. Everyone knew everything in Pinewood. "My dad's in prison," I said flatly, as if that explained everything. Maybe in Pinewood it did. Mitchell nodded slowly. "I know who your father is, and your cousin Dwayne. That doesn't mean I know who you are." I didn't have an answer for that. "You know," he continued, "tonight, when I got to that wreck, you didn't run. You stayed with your friend. You tried to help him. Lot of good it did," I muttered. "Actually, it did a lot of good. If you hadn't applied pressure to that head wound, he might have bled out before I got there." I hadn't thought about that. I just reacted. "Your friend Cade's got a long recovery ahead. But he's alive because you didn't leave him, and because you called for help right away," Mitchell said. "That counts for something." We pulled up outside my mom's trailer. The lights were on. Someone had called her about the accident. "Think about what you want your life to look like, Jake," Mitchell said before I got out. "Tonight doesn't have to define you. Neither does your last name." Then he handed me a card with his number on it. If you ever want to see what police work is actually about, give me a call. I do ride-alongs sometimes. Might change your perspective. I took the card, confused by the offer, and got out of the car. As predicted, my mom was frantic, hugging me tight, while simultaneously threatening to kill me for scaring her. Word spread fast around town about the accident. I visited Cade in the hospital every day for 2 weeks. He had a traumatic brain injury that affected his speech and required months of therapy. Ryan's leg needed multiple surgeries. Jesse never hung out with us again. But the strangest thing was what happened with me and Officer Mitchell. 2 weeks after the accident, I called the number on his card. I expected him to have forgotten about me, or to have just been making a nice gesture that night. But he sounded genuinely happy to hear from me. I did 3 ride-alongs with him that summer. I saw him help an elderly woman who'd fallen in her bathroom, talk a drunk guy out of starting a bar fight, and coach a terrified teenager through her first car accident. Just a fender bender, thankfully. Not once did I see him draw his weapon or rough anybody up. Instead, I watched him listen to people, really listen, even when they were cursing at him or crying or not making any sense. He knew everyone's name, asked about their kids, remembered their problems from previous calls. When I told my family I was thinking about attending the police academy after graduation, you'd have thought I'd announced I was joining a cult. My uncle stopped talking to me entirely. My mom was confused but supportive in her way. Cade, still working through his recovery, just stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "You're going to be a pig?" he asked, the words slightly slurred from his brain injury. "I'm going to help people," I corrected him, "like Mitchell helped you." 4 years after that night, I graduated from the academy. Some of my family didn't come. Some of my old friends stopped calling. But Officer Mitchell was there, shaking my hand with a proud smile. I took a position in a small town in the Appalachian foothills, not too different from where I grew up. Every day brings new challenges that the academy didn't fully prepare me for. People still look at me with suspicion sometimes, now because of the uniform instead of my last name. But sometimes when I respond to a car accident and see the fear in a teenager's eyes, I remember lying in that ditch with Cade's blood on my hands. I remember expecting the worst from Officer Mitchell and receiving compassion instead. And I try to be the kind of officer who might change someone's perspective, the way mine was changed that night. I still have nightmares about the accident. I still hear the sound of the impact and see Cade's lifeless body when I close my eyes. But I also see how one terrible night altered the course of my life in ways I never could have imagined. One moment, one decision, one person who saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. That's all it took to change everything. I still can't sleep right. 2 weeks ago, I was working the night shift at the hospital, and now I'm on mandatory leave. My supervisor says it's for emotional recovery, but I know they all think I'm losing it. Maybe I am. What happened that night on Ridgeway Road keeps replaying in my head, and I need to get it out somewhere. I've never been the type to believe in the paranormal, but I don't have any other explanation for what I experienced. I'm a nurse at Pinewood Memorial in a small town in eastern Tennessee. It's not even on most maps, one of those places nestled in the Appalachians where everybody knows everybody, and outsiders stick out like a sore thumb. I've lived here my whole life, except for when I went to nursing school in Knoxville. That night started like any other. I finished my 12-hour shift at 11 p.m., and headed home on the back roads I always take. It was raining, Not heavy, just a light drizzle that made the asphalt glisten under my headlights. My Honda Civic isn't new by any means, but it's reliable. Never given me trouble before. The road home winds through dense forest for about 15 miles. No streetlights, no houses, just trees and the occasional deer crossing sign. Cell service is spotty at best. I've made this drive hundreds of times, so I wasn't particularly alert, just tired and looking forward to crawling into bed. I was about halfway home, in the thickest part of the woods, when my headlights caught something moving at the edge of the road. Before I could even process what was happening, a small figure darted out in front of my car. I slammed on the brakes and swerved hard to the right. There was a sickening thud, and my car skidded to a stop on the wet pavement. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I sat frozen for a few seconds, trying to comprehend what had just happened. Then the nurse in me kicked in. Someone was hurt, and they needed help. I grabbed my phone and the small emergency medical kit I keep in my glove compartment, then jumped out of the car. The rain had picked up slightly, and I squinted through it, scanning the roadside. That's when I saw him, a small boy, maybe 9 or 10 years old, lying on the ground about 15 feet from my car. He was wearing jeans and a dark t-shirt, both soaked from the rain. His right leg was bent at an angle that made my stomach turn. In 15 years of nursing, I've seen plenty of compound fractures, but this was bad. I rushed over to him, already mentally running through the first aid procedures. "Hey, buddy, I'm Michelle. I'm a nurse. Don't try to move, okay? I'm going to help you." The boy didn't respond. He wasn't screaming or crying, which immediately struck me as odd. With an injury that severe, he should have been in excruciating pain. But his face was eerily calm as he stared up at the night sky. "Can you tell me your name?" I asked, kneeling beside him and opening my med kit. "Where do you live? Are your parents nearby?" Still nothing. I pulled out my phone to call 911, cursing the poor reception. As I was dialing, the boy finally spoke. "I need to get in your car." His voice was flat, emotionless. Not at all what you'd expect from a child with a severely broken leg. I looked at him more closely, trying to assess if he was in shock. "Honey, you're hurt. I need to call an ambulance. We shouldn't move you with that leg." "I'm fine," he said, still in that unnaturally even tone. "I just need to get in your car." Before I could respond, my phone died. The screen went black, even though I'd had at least 40% battery left. I muttered a curse and stood up, deciding I'd have to drive him to the hospital myself, broken leg or not. There was no one else around for miles. "Okay, I'll help you into the car, but we need to be really careful with your leg. It's going to hurt a lot when we move you." I turned back toward my Civic to grab a blanket from the trunk, planning to use it as a makeshift stretcher. That's when I heard movement behind me. I spun around, and my blood ran cold. The boy was standing, on both legs. The same leg I'd just seen bent at an impossible angle was now supporting his weight perfectly. I took an involuntary step back. "How are you?" He tilted his head slightly, like a curious animal. "I told you I'm fine. I just need to get in your car." Something was very wrong. My mind raced to make sense of what I was seeing. Had I imagined the broken leg? Was I more tired than I thought? But no, I'd seen it clearly. This wasn't possible. Then I noticed his eyes. In the dim glow from my headlights, I could see they were completely black. Not dark brown, not dilated pupils, solid black, like pools of oil. No whites, no irises, just darkness. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the rain. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get away from him. I need to call someone." I stammered, backing toward my car. Your parents must be worried sick. There's no need to call anyone, he said, taking a step toward me. His movements were too fluid, too controlled for a child his age. Just let me in your car. I need to go with you. I reached my driver's side door and quickly got in, fighting the urge to panic. I needed to think rationally. There had to be an explanation. Maybe he was wearing contacts. Maybe I was having some kind of stress-induced hallucination. I rolled down my window just a crack. Look, I hit you with my car. I need to take you to the hospital to get checked out. His expression didn't change, but something in his demeanor shifted. Let me in, Michelle. I froze. I hadn't told him my name. Before I could process this, he was at my window, his face inches from the glass. His black eyes seemed to absorb what little light there was. Let me in, he repeated, his voice deeper now, with an edge that made my skin crawl. You hit me. You owe me. My hand fumbled for the keys in the ignition. I needed to get out of there, to find help, to make sense of what was happening. But as I turned the key, the engine sputtered and died. No, 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 I muttered, trying again. The starter clicked weakly, but the engine wouldn't catch. The boy pressed his palm against my window. It left a smear that looked black in the darkness. Let me in, Michelle. It's raining. I'm cold. His voice had changed again, now sounding exactly like a normal, frightened child. For a split second, I almost complied out of pure instinct, the nurturing part of me that had become a nurse in the first place. My hand actually moved toward the door lock, but then I glimpsed those eyes again, and the moment passed. Go away, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm calling the police. His face contorted into a smile that was too wide, stretching his mouth in a way that didn't seem humanly possible. No one's coming, Michelle. It's just you and me out here. I tried my phone again, but it remained dead. The boy began tapping on my window, slowly at first, then more insistently. Tap, tap, tap. His fingernails made a sound against the glass that set my teeth on edge. Let me in, let me in, let me in, he chanted, his voice becoming a bizarre sing-song. You hit me, you hurt me, now let me in. I tried the ignition again, simultaneously locking all the doors. This time, the engine coughed to life. I didn't hesitate. I threw the car into drive and floored it, not even checking if the boy was clear of the vehicle. In my rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of him standing in the middle of the road, watching me drive away. He didn't chase after me. He didn't need to, because 2 miles down the road, my engine started making a terrible knocking sound, and white smoke began pouring from under the hood. The temperature gauge shot into the red zone, and I had no choice but to pull over. I sat there with the hazard lights blinking, trying not to panic. I was still miles from the nearest house, with a dead phone and a disabled car, and somewhere behind me, that thing was probably following. I rummaged through my glove compartment, looking for anything that might help, a flashlight, a charger, anything. As I searched, the interior of my car grew noticeably colder. I could see my breath fogging in front of my face. That's when I heard it, a light tap on my passenger side window. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help myself. The boy was there, smiling that too wide smile, his black eyes reflecting my own terrified face back at me. But now there was something different about him. His body was twisted, broken in several places, his head tilted at an angle that would snap a normal person's neck. Blood ran from a gash on his forehead, dripping down onto his t-shirt. You did this to me, he said, his voice clear despite the closed window between us. The least you can do is let me in. I screamed then, couldn't help it. I scrambled across the seats to the opposite side of the car, as far from him as I could get. When I looked back, he was gone. My breath came in short gasps as I scanned the darkness outside. There was no sign of him. Had I imagined it? Was I losing my mind? Then I saw headlights approaching from behind. A police cruiser pulled up behind my car, its roof lights casting blue and red streaks through the rain. I've never been so relieved to see law enforcement in my life. The officer approached cautiously, flashlight in hand. I rolled down my window just enough to speak. "Are you all right, ma'am?" he asked, shining the light briefly in my face. His nameplate read Blackwood. "Officer," I said, my voice shaking. "There was a boy. I hit him with my car, but then he was fine. And his eyes—" I trailed off, realizing how insane I must sound. Officer Blackwood's expression changed subtly. "A boy? Where did this happen?" I explained where I'd hit him, how his leg had been broken but then wasn't, and how he'd somehow followed me to where my car broke down. I left out the black eyes, afraid he'd think I was crazy or drunk. He listened without interrupting, then swept his flashlight around the area. "Stay in your vehicle, Ms. Carpenter, Michelle Carpenter." "Ms. Carpenter, I'm going to take a look around." He walked the perimeter of my car, checking the surrounding woods. I watched him through my mirrors, terrified the boy would appear again. After a few minutes, he returned. "I don't see anyone out here," he said. "But let's get you somewhere safe. Your engine's overheated. Could be a busted radiator hose. I'll call for a tow and give you a ride into town." As he helped me into his cruiser, I felt like I was being watched from the trees. Officer Blackwood must have sensed my unease. "This stretch of road has a history," he said as we pulled away. "There have been other incidents." "What kind of incidents?" I asked. He hesitated. "People see things sometimes, especially at night." "Things like children with black eyes," I ventured. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. "You saw that, huh?" "What are they?" I whispered. "I don't know," he admitted. "Local legend calls them hollow children. They mimic injury or distress to lure in help, but they're not human." We drove in silence for a while. I kept checking the back seat, half expecting to see the boy sitting there with his impossible smile. "What happens to people who let them in?" I finally asked. Officer Blackwood glanced at me. "They disappear, or worse." "Worse?" "Bad luck follows them, accidents, illness. It's like once they notice you, they don't let go easily." A chill ran through me. "So what do I do now?" "You got away," he said simply. "Most people do if they don't let them in. Just be careful for a while." He dropped me off at the local motel since I didn't want to be alone at my place that night. Before he left, he gave me his card. "Call if anything else happens. Anything at all." That was 2 weeks ago. Nothing strange has happened since then, but I can't shake the feeling that it's not over. I see black eyes in my dreams. Sometimes when I'm driving, I think I glimpse a small figure at the edge of the woods. I've started taking the main highway home from work, even though it adds 20 minutes to my commute. Officer Blackwood checked on me a few days after it happened. He said they never found any evidence of an accident on Ridgeway Road. No blood, no skid marks, nothing. According to him, that's typical with these encounters. I've been reading everything I can find about black-eyed children. Most stories end like mine. People who don't let them in usually escape. But there are darker accounts too, from friends or relatives of people who weren't so careful. Tomorrow I go back to work. I've changed my shifts so I never drive home after dark anymore. I've had my car thoroughly checked by 2 different mechanics who found nothing wrong with it. My phone works perfectly now, but sometimes late at night I hear tapping on my window. Tap, 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 like small fingernails against glass. And even though my apartment is on the 2nd floor, I never look. I never open the blinds, because I know what's waiting out there, and it still wants in. I've been an officer in Ridge Hollow for almost 8 years now. It's a small rural town in Kentucky, mostly quiet except for the usual domestic calls and drug issues you'd expect in any place where poverty has settled in for the long haul. I never thought I'd see something that would make me question my own sanity, but I swear every word of what I'm about to share is true. It happened last Wednesday. I was nearing the end of my shift when dispatch sent me out to Casey Powell's property on Old Timber Road. Casey's a local character, mid-60s, lives alone in his grandfather's house on about 3 acres of overgrown land. He's got a history of meth use and paranoid episodes, but he's been clean for a while, according to his case manager. Everyone in the department knows him. We get calls from him every couple months about trespassers or government surveillance. Usually nothing there. This call was different, though. Casey reported that a pizza delivery guy had left a pizza and money on his porch, even though he hadn't ordered anything. Sounded like a prank, or maybe Casey was having an episode, but it was a slow night, so I took the call. Casey's place is about 20 minutes out of town, deep in the woods where the cell service disappears and GPS gets confused. The driveway is really just 2 dirt tracks with weeds growing between them. When I pulled up, Casey was waiting on his porch, pacing back and forth with a cigarette. His porch light was burned out, so my headlights were the only real illumination. "Officer Mason," he called out before I even got out of my cruiser. About time someone showed up. I approached cautiously. You learn to be careful around Casey. His house is a mess, peeling paint, rotted boards, trash scattered around the yard. The kind of place that makes you wonder how anyone lives there. "Evening, Casey. Tell me about this pizza situation." Casey was agitated, scratching at his arms and neck constantly. "Some guy in a red shirt shows up with a pizza, says it was ordered to this address. I told him I didn't order no damn pizza, but he insisted. Said the order matched my landline number exactly." "Do you still have the pizza?" I asked. "Hell no. Threw it in the trash. Don't trust it. But look." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a $20 bill. "Driver gave me this too. Said it was part of the order. A $20 tip already paid for. He was real insistent I take it." I examined the bill. Just a regular 20. Nothing suspicious about it. Guy kept saying it matched my number. Kept trying to get me to take the pizza. Finally, I told him to get lost. After he left, I called y'all. Something ain't right. You think it's a prank? Maybe. Or maybe someone's trying to poison me. Wouldn't be the first time the government's tried something. I sighed. Typical Casey paranoia. "Did you get the name of the pizza place?" "Pizza Palace or something. Don't matter. Listen, after he left, I heard noises coming from under my house. My attention perked up slightly. "What kind of noises?" "Scratching, moving around. Been hearing it for weeks now, but tonight it's worse." I shined my flashlight around the perimeter of Casey's house. It sits about 3 feet off the ground on old concrete blocks, typical for these parts to prevent flooding and help with the summer heat. There used to be lattice work around the bottom to keep animals out, but most of it had rotted away years ago. "Mind if I take a look under your porch?" Casey shrugged. "Suit yourself, but I'm telling you, someone's messing with me." I got down on one knee by the largest opening under the porch. The beam of my maglite cut through the darkness, revealing empty beer cans, some trash, and what looked like scraps of raw meat scattered around. "Casey, you been throwing meat under here?" "Hell no. Why would I do that?" I crawled forward a bit, shining the light deeper under the house. That's when I noticed something strange. A large hole in the ground, maybe 3 feet wide, that definitely didn't look natural. The The dirt around it was freshly disturbed. "Casey, there's some kind of hole under here." Casey crouched down beside me, peering into the darkness. "Son of a bitch," he muttered. "Those are my beer cans. Someone's been living under my damn house." Before I could stop him, Casey dropped to his hands and knees and crawled under the porch toward the hole. "Casey, wait. We don't know what's down there." He ignored me completely, sliding headfirst into the hole like a man half his age. I heard his voice echo up from below. "There's a tunnel down here. God damn it, Casey. Get back up here right now," I shouted, but there was no response. I had no choice. I radioed dispatch to inform them of the situation and requested backup. Then I took a deep breath, turned my flashlight to its brightest setting, and followed Casey into the hole. The drop was about 6 feet. I landed on soft dirt and found myself in what appeared to be a natural cave that had been widened. The air was damp and cold, with a strange metallic smell I couldn't identify. My flashlight beam revealed a rough tunnel stretching ahead, sloping gently downward. "Casey," I called out. No answer. I followed the tunnel, keeping my hand near my service weapon. The passage twisted and turned, sometimes so narrow I had to turn sideways to get through. The walls were damp limestone, with formations that reminded me of the touristy caves they show on school trips. Except this wasn't on any map I knew of. After about 50 yards, the tunnel widened into a small chamber. That's when I saw the first one. In the corner of the room was what I first thought was an old man, pale white skin, thinning white hair hunched over. But when my flashlight beam hit him, he turned toward me and I nearly had a heart attack. His eyes were milky white, completely clouded over like cataracts, but somehow I could tell he was looking right at me. His skin wasn't just pale, it was almost translucent, with blue veins clearly visible underneath. He made a strange hissing sound and scuttled away from the light with inhuman speed, disappearing into another tunnel before I could react. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I drew my weapon, genuinely afraid for the first time in years. "Casey!" I shouted, no longer caring who or what heard me. "Casey, where are you?" A faint yell echoed from one of the tunnels. I followed it, moving as quickly as I dared. The passage descended steeply, forcing me to half-slide down sections of loose dirt and rock. I could hear strange clicking sounds echoing through the tunnels, almost like Morse code or some primitive language. The tunnel eventually opened into a larger cavern, maybe 30 feet across. What I saw there will haunt me until the day I die. Casey was there, but he wasn't alone. He was tied to a crude chair made of branches and twine, surrounded by 5 or 6 of those pale humanoid creatures. They varied in size and apparent age, some smaller like children, others tall and thin. All had that same milky white eyes and hair, skin so pale it almost glowed in the beam of my flashlight. They were dressed in tattered clothing that looked like it had been scavenged from garbage. When my light hit them, they all turned toward me simultaneously, making those clicking sounds and tapping on the cave walls with long, dirty fingernails. Casey's eyes were wide with terror. "Officer Mason, help me!" he screamed. I raised my weapon. "Police! Get away from him now!" The creatures didn't seem to understand, continuing their clicking and moving closer to Casey. I fired a warning shot into the ceiling of the cave, and the sound was deafening in the enclosed space. The bullet ricocheted, and I think it hit one of the creatures because there was a high-pitched shriek, followed by chaos. I rushed forward as the creatures scattered, some retreating into tunnels, others climbing up the walls of the cave with disturbing agility. I reached Casey and cut through his restraints with my pocket knife. "What the hell are these things?" I gasped as I helped him to his feet. "I don't know." Casey was hyperventilating. They grabbed me as soon as I came down here. Been tapping on my walls for weeks. Jesus Christ, they live under my house. We need to get out of here now, I said, pulling him toward what I thought was the tunnel we'd come from. But in the confusion, I'd lost track of which passage was which. There were at least 5 different openings leading from the main chamber. We picked one that seemed to slope upward, hoping it would lead to the surface. Casey stumbled along beside me, occasionally looking back over his shoulder. "They're following us," he whispered. I could hear it too, the soft patter of bare feet on stone, the clicking sounds growing louder. We ran faster, the beam of my flashlight bouncing wildly off the cave walls. The tunnel narrowed, then widened again, but it wasn't the same one we'd come down. This was unfamiliar territory. The floor suddenly disappeared beneath Casey's feet. 1 second he was running beside me, the next he was gone with a startled yelp. I skidded to a stop just in time to avoid falling into the hole myself. My flashlight revealed Casey about 10 feet below, lying on his back, but conscious. "Are you okay?" I called down. "Think I broke my ankle," he groaned. I could still hear the creatures behind us getting closer. There was no choice. I had to go down. I found handholds on the rough rock wall and climbed down to Casey. His ankle was already swelling, but he could still walk if I supported him. "There's another tunnel down here," he pointed with his chin. This new passage was even worse than the others. Low ceiling, narrow walls, the floor littered with small bones that crunched under our feet. Some looked disturbingly human. We moved as quickly as Casey's injury would allow, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter behind us. Then my flashlight started to flicker. "No, no, no," I muttered, shaking it. The batteries were dying. The light steadied for a moment, then grew dimmer. "I got this." Casey pulled out a tiny keychain light and a book of matches from his pocket. "Always carry these. Never know when you'll need 'em." His little light wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. We continued forward, the walls of the tunnel now glistening with moisture. The air felt different too, fresher somehow, with a slight breeze. We had to be getting close to an exit. The tunnel opened into another large cavern, but this one contained a pool of water that stretched into darkness. The surface was perfectly still, reflecting our lights like a mirror. The far side was barely visible, maybe 50 feet away, where another tunnel entrance beckoned, and I could swear I saw moonlight coming from it. "We have to cross," I said. Casey looked doubtful. "Don't know how deep it is." I shined my failing flashlight into the water. It was crystal clear, and I could see the bottom about 5 feet down. What disturbed me were the fish, small, transparent things with no visible eyes, swimming lazily through the underground lake. "It's not too deep. We can wade across." Casey nodded reluctantly. I helped him into the water, which was ice cold and sent shocks through my system. We moved slowly, the water rising to our chests at the deepest point. Those blind fish brushed against our legs occasionally, making us flinch. We were about halfway across when it happened. Something grabbed Casey's legs from below. He screamed, a sound of pure terror that echoed off the cavern walls. I spun around to see him being pulled under by one of the pale creatures, the older one I'd first encountered. I still had my gun, though it was soaking wet. I didn't know if it would fire, but I had no choice. I lunged toward Casey, grabbing his arm with one hand while pointing my weapon at the creature with the other. The creature's face was just below the water surface, those milky eyes staring up at me as it pulled on Casey's legs. I pulled the trigger. The gun fired. The sound magnified 100-fold in the cavern. The water around the creature turned red, and its grip on Casey loosened. We scrambled toward the far shore, splashing desperately through the water. We reached the other side and dragged ourselves up onto the rocky shore. Behind us, the water was churning, more of those things moving beneath the surface. We didn't wait to see if they would follow. We staggered into the tunnel, which sloped steeply upward. My flashlight finally died completely. We relied on Casey's keychain light, which cast just enough glow to see a few feet ahead. The tunnel grew narrower, then widened. The air became fresher, and we could smell pine trees and night air. Finally, we saw stars above us. The tunnel ended in an opening barely big enough for a man to squeeze through. I helped Casey out first, then pulled myself up after him. We emerged in the middle of the woods, miles from Casey's house. It was the middle of the night, the forest silent around us except for the normal sounds of insects and the occasional hoot of an owl. No sign of those creatures, no clicking sounds, nothing to indicate that the nightmare we'd just experienced was real. But it was real. Casey's ankle was swollen to twice its normal size. I was soaking wet and covered in cuts and bruises, and my service weapon was missing 2 bullets. We stumbled through the woods until we found a dirt road, which eventually led us to a highway. I flagged down a passing truck driver who let us use his phone to call for help. My fellow officers found us sitting by the side of the road, probably looking like lunatics. I didn't tell them everything, just said we'd found a cave under Casey's house, got lost, and eventually found our way out. The sheriff looked skeptical, but didn't press it. Casey was taken to the hospital for his ankle, and I paid for him to stay in a motel for the night. No way was he going back to that house. The next day, I drove out to where we'd emerged from the cave. In the daylight, I couldn't find the entrance. It was like it had never existed. I went back to Casey's property too, looked under the porch. The hole was there, but it had been filled in with fresh dirt. Casey's talking to his case manager about getting an apartment in town. Says he's never going back to that house again, and I don't blame him. I've been having nightmares every night since it happened. Dreams of pale figures with milky eyes tapping on my bedroom walls, trying to dig their way in. I still have so many questions. What were those things? How long have they been living under Ridge Hollow? Was the pizza delivery a trap or some kind of offering? I don't know if I'll ever find answers, but one thing's for sure. I never go anywhere now without a backup flashlight, and I always check under my bed before I go to sleep. I don't know if anyone will believe this story. I barely believe it myself, and I lived through it. But I swear it's true. And if you ever find yourself in rural Kentucky and hear strange tapping sounds coming from your walls at night, don't investigate. Call someone, anyone. Just don't go looking for the source yourself, because some things should stay buried, and some caves should never be explored. I'm still shaken writing this, even though it's been over 5 years. Those trees, those goddamn trees. I know how this sounds, but I need to get this off my chest, and nobody in my real life would believe me anyway. Back in 2018, I was a fresh-faced 23-year-old who just graduated from Dayton Police Academy. I had all these big dreams about becoming a detective someday, making a difference, the usual naive stuff. But the economy wasn't great, and police jobs in the bigger cities were competitive. So when I got assigned as a deputy in Rondeville, this tiny speck of a town in Perry County tucked into Wayne National Forest, I figured it was a decent first step. A place to get some experience before moving on to something bigger. Rondeville was barely a town at all, just 50 people. A general store, a church, and a handful of houses. The police station was just a small office attached to the town hall. Sheriff Tanner was in his 60s, counting down to retirement, and I was his only deputy. When he gave me the tour on my first day, he chuckled and said, "Hope you like quiet, son. Last arrest we made was a drunk driver passing through in 2003. I settled into a small rental house on the edge of town. It had this huge window in the living room facing the forest, and I remember thinking how peaceful it looked. That's the thought that haunts me most now. For the first 2 weeks, Sheriff Tanner wasn't wrong about the quiet. My job mostly consisted of driving around the county roads, checking in on elderly residents, and breaking up the occasional argument at Miller's Bar in the next town over. I spent a lot of time just sitting in the cruiser, staring at the woods, listening to podcasts. The locals were friendly enough, though I got the sense they were just waiting for me to leave like all the other young deputies before me. Then Natalie Briarwood disappeared. She was a hiker from Columbus, 28 years old, who'd come to explore Wayne National Forest. Her car was found parked at a trailhead about 5 miles from town. Her roommate reported her missing when she didn't return that evening. The search for Natalie was my first real taste of police work, and honestly, I was excited. Sheriff Tanner coordinated with park rangers and a few volunteers from town to organize search parties. Since I was young and fit, I was assigned to cover the most rugged section of trail with 2 rangers. We started early that morning, with the fog still clinging to the ground between the trees. The forest was gorgeous, all towering oaks and maples with sunlight filtering through. We called out Natalie's name every few minutes, our voices echoing through the trees. Around noon, I noticed something odd. The rangers and I had been separated by maybe 50 yards, still within shouting distance, but not within sight of each other due to the dense underbrush. I was sweating, tired, and had that weird tunneled focus you get when you've been concentrating on one task for hours. That's when I realized the forest had gone completely silent. I mean dead silent. No birds, no insects buzzing, no leaves rustling. Just this heavy, pressing silence that felt almost physical, like the air had gotten thicker. Then I heard my name. Ethan. It was my own voice, not an echo, my actual voice, but I hadn't spoken. Ethan Morris. I froze. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Hello?" I called out, drawing my service weapon instinctively. "Rangers? Anyone there?" Only silence answered. Then, "Hello? Rangers? Anyone there?" My exact words, my exact tone, repeated back to me. I felt the hair on my arms stand up, and a cold sweat broke out across my forehead despite the summer heat. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to sound authoritative, but my voice cracked. "Who's there?" The forest mimicked, perfectly matching my nervous tone. I started backing away, turning in a slow circle, my gun held out in front of me. There was nobody there, just trees and more trees. "This isn't funny," I shouted, my heart hammering against my ribs. "This isn't funny." The voice shot back, from a different direction this time. I was about to run back toward where I'd last seen the rangers when I spotted something blue through the trees about 20 yards ahead. I approached slowly, my stomach already knotting, because somehow I knew what I was going to find. It was Natalie Briarwood's body, crumpled at the base of a massive oak tree. She was wearing the blue hiking jacket described in the missing person report. Her neck was bent at an impossible angle, and her eyes were open, staring blankly at the canopy above. It looked like she'd fallen from the tree. There were broken branches above. But what would an experienced hiker be doing climbing an oak tree in the middle of nowhere? As I knelt beside her, reaching with shaking fingers to check for a pulse I knew wouldn't be there, I heard it again, right behind me. "Ethan Morris." This time it wasn't my voice. It was a woman's voice, soft, almost gentle. but with this strange hollow quality to it. I spun around, nearly falling over, but there was no one there. I radioed the rangers with trembling hands, gave them my coordinates, and waited by the body. I didn't hear the voice again, but the silence remained, pressing in on me from all sides. When they finally arrived, the sounds of the forest suddenly returned. Birds, insects, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, as if someone had flipped a switch. I didn't tell anyone about the voices. Would you? First real case, and I'm hearing things? That's one-way ticket to desk duty and mandatory psych evaluations. The official cause of Natalie's death was ruled an accidental fall. The theory was that she climbed the tree to get a better view or take photos, lost her footing, and fell. Case closed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong about the whole situation. After Natalie's funeral, a small, sad affair attended mostly by locals who'd never even met her, I was approached by an older Native American man I'd seen around town but hadn't spoken to. His name was Joseph Shanta, and he lived in a cabin at the edge of the forest, outside the town limits. "You heard them, didn't you?" he asked without preamble, his weathered face serious. "The voices in the woods." I felt the blood drain from my face. "I don't know what you're talking about." Shanta shook his head. "I can see it in your eyes, Deputy. The forest spoke to you, just like it's spoken to others before. It mimicked you, didn't it?" My silence was answer enough. "Come to my cabin tonight," he said. "There are things you should know. Things about this forest that aren't in your police manuals." I almost didn't go. Part of me wanted to write Shanta off as the local eccentric, maybe dealing with some mental health issues. But I couldn't explain what I'd heard in those woods, and I needed answers. Shanta's cabin was rustic, but neat, with a small porch overlooking a clearing. Inside, the walls were lined with bookshelves full of old volumes and what looked like tribal artifacts. He motioned for me to sit at a simple wooden table while he made tea. "My grandmother was Shawnee," he explained, setting a steaming mug in front of me. "This land once belonged to her people before the settlers came. They had stories about these woods, stories that were passed down through generations." He pulled out a worn leather binder and opened it on the table. Inside were yellowed newspaper clippings, dozens of them. 500 years ago, something fell from the sky into these woods, Shanta said. The Shawnee said it came with fire and thunder, and where it landed, all animal life perished. The forest grew back strangely after that. The trees were different, and they spoke. I shuffled through the clippings as he talked. They were missing persons reports, obituaries, and news articles about mysterious deaths in Wayne National Forest. The dates spanned from the early 1900s to the present, with clusters of disappearances every 30 to 40 years. "The entity in the woods mimics human voices to lure its victims," Shanta continued. "It feeds on them, and every generation it demands a sacrifice. This is—" I struggled to find words that wouldn't offend him. "It's interesting folklore, mister." "Shanta, but Natalie Briarwood fell from a tree. It was an accident." Shanta's expression darkened. "Was it? Did you check the tree she fell from? Did you notice any strange markings on it? Any sap that looked too red to be natural?" I hadn't. The rangers had taken over once they arrived, and I'd been too shaken to look closely at the scene. "The thing in the woods is hungry, Deputy Morris," Shanta said, "and one sacrifice is rarely enough. Be careful. It knows your name now." I left Shanta's cabin more unsettled than when I'd arrived. I tried to tell myself it was just superstition, local legend blown out of proportion. But those voices, how could I explain those voices? It was nearly midnight when I drove back to town. The road wound through the forest, and my headlights carved a narrow tunnel through the darkness. I was about halfway home when something darted across the road, too fast to see clearly, but it looked like a deer. I swerved, slammed on the brakes, and ended up on the shoulder, facing the woods. I sat there for a minute, catching my breath, my headlights illuminating the first row of trees. Shanta's words kept echoing in my head. I got out of the cruiser, grabbing my flashlight. I wasn't sure what I was doing or why I was doing it. Maybe I needed to prove to myself that they were just trees, nothing more. I approached the nearest oak, a massive thing with bark like weathered skin. On impulse, I pulled out my pocket knife and did something childish. I carved my initials into the bark. EM. Just a small mark, hardly noticeable unless you were looking for it. The moment I finished, something dark and viscous began to seep from the carving. At first, I thought it was sap, but it was too red, too thick. Blood. The tree was bleeding. I stumbled back, my flashlight beam shaking wildly across the trunk. The blood flowed faster, running down the bark in rivulets. Then I heard it again, that terrible mimicry of my own voice. Ethan Morris. The sound came from the tree, not from behind it or around it, from the tree itself. I watched in horror as the bark where I'd carved my initials began to split open, widening into a crude, gaping mouth. Inside was pink, glistening flesh and what looked like black fangs, dripping with more of that red fluid. Ethan Morris, it said again, in my voice, the lips of bark moving in perfect sync with the words. You shouldn't have done that, Ethan Morris. I raised my service weapon and fired 3 rounds directly into that nightmare mouth. The bullets disappeared into the flesh with wet thunks, and a high, inhuman shriek pierced the night. The mouth convulsed, oozing more blood. That's when I became aware of movement all around me. I swung my flashlight in a panicked arc and saw the impossible. The trees were moving, not swaying in the wind, but actually shifting positions, their trunks twisting, branches reaching toward me like arms. Nearby trees began splitting open too, forming more of those terrible mouths. They were all speaking now, a chorus of overlapping voices, some mine, some Natalie's, some I didn't recognize. Ethan Morris, help me. It hurts. Come closer. Join us. I ran back to my cruiser, scrambling to get the key in the ignition with trembling hands. As I pulled away, I saw in my rearview mirror that several trees had uprooted themselves completely and were dragging themselves toward the road with their branches, leaving trails of torn earth behind them. I drove straight back to my house, packed everything I could fit in my personal car, left my badge and resignation letter on Sheriff Tanner's desk, and got the hell out of Ohio. That was 5 years ago. I live in Nevada now, working security at a casino in Las Vegas. I still have nightmares about those trees, those mouths. Sometimes I wake up convinced I can hear my own voice calling my name, even though I'm alone in my apartment. I've researched everything I can find about Wayne National Forest. There have been 7 more disappearances there since I left. The official explanations range from accidental falls to animal attacks to hikers simply getting lost. But I know better. People ask me sometimes why I left Ohio for the desert. I tell them I got tired of the greenery, make some joke about preferring the heat. The truth is, I chose Nevada for one simple reason. There aren't many trees here, and the ones that do grow in the city aren't old enough to have developed a taste for human flesh. I don't expect anyone to believe me. Hell, most days I try not to believe it myself. But sometimes, when the wind blows just right through the palm trees outside my apartment, I swear I can hear them whispering my name. I still can't sleep properly. Every time I close my eyes, I see that tower standing against the mountain sky, and I'm back there again. It's been 3 months since I escaped, and I still haven't told anyone the full story until now. I need to get this off my chest before I lose my mind completely. I'd waited 2 years for my fire lookout position at Sentinel Peak. 2 years of applications, interviews, and background checks just to spend a summer alone in the wilderness, watching for smoke plumes. I was beyond excited when I finally got the call. The Forestry Service coordinator sounded almost apologetic when he offered me the position, mentioning something about high turnover at that particular lookout. I didn't care. I needed the solitude after my dad's death and my subsequent breakdown. 6 months in the mountains, away from everything, it sounded perfect. The drive up to Sentinel Peak was my first warning sign. The service road wound around the mountain for nearly 20 miles, taking us deeper into wilderness than I'd expected. My driver, an older guy named Hank, barely spoke during the entire 3-hour journey. When he did, it wasn't reassuring. "Last lookout up here didn't make it through the season," he said, about halfway up the mountain. "Found him with his brains all over the cabin floor, rifle in his mouth." I laughed nervously, thinking he was messing with the new guy. "Seriously?" "Dead serious. They cleaned up best they could, but there's still a stain on the floorboards. You'll see it." I felt sick. "And they didn't think to mention this during my interview?" Hank just shrugged. "Hard to get people to take this assignment. Tower's been here since the 40s. Bad things happen sometimes." We didn't talk much after that. The lookout tower itself was everything I'd expected. A small cabin perched on stilts with a 360-degree view of nothing but pine forest and mountains. The isolation hit me immediately. I could actually hear the wind moving through the trees below. No road noise, no planes overhead, no human sounds at all. Just silence. Inside, the cabin was basic but functional. A small kitchen area, a desk with radio equipment, a twin bed, and a wood stove. And sure enough, in the center of the floor, I could see a dark stain about the size of a dinner plate that no amount of scrubbing had completely removed. Hank helped me unload my supplies and handed me a manila envelope. "Station protocols," he said. "Read 'em carefully. Follow 'em exactly. Radio check is at 0800 tomorrow. Someone will bring the rest of your supplies in 2 days." Before I could ask any questions, he was gone, leaving me alone with the envelope and the blood stain. I unpacked my stuff first, trying to make the place feel less like a suicide scene and more like home. It was still light out, so I took some time to get familiar with the tower. The observation deck wrapped around the entire cabin, giving me uninterrupted views in every direction. The nearest road was invisible from here. The nearest town was over 60 miles away. I was utterly, completely alone. When darkness began to fall, I finally opened the envelope. Inside was a typewritten list of rules for Sentinel Peak Lookout Station. 1. Lights out at 2200 hours, 10 yaud p.m. No exceptions. 2. No electronic devices to be operated after lights out. 3. Supply drops occur twice weekly, Monday, Thursday. Use color-coded flares for special requests. Red, medical. Blue was food. Green, your equipment. 4. No visitors allowed at the station. Report any unexpected visitors immediately. 5. The safe under the desk contains emergency supplies. Open only if necessary. 6. Maintain radio logs of all communications. 7. Contact Sister Station 12 before retiring each night. The list was stamped with an official Forestry Service seal, but something about it felt off. I'd done my research on lookout positions. I knew the basic protocols: report fires, log weather conditions, maintain the station. But these rules seemed strangely specific, especially the parts about visitors and lights out. I went to check the safe mentioned in rule number 5. It was there, under the desk, a small metal box with a combination lock. The combination was written on a piece of tape stuck to the bottom of the desk, 12 Tucker 1340. I decided to leave it closed for now. I didn't need emergency supplies yet. At exactly 8 p.m., I used the radio to call Sister Station 12 as instructed. After 3 attempts with no response, I gave up and recorded no contact with Sister Station 12 in the logbook. I noticed previous entries showed the same result for the past week. That first night was rough. The wind picked up around midnight, making the whole tower creak and sway slightly. Every few minutes I'd hear something that sounded like footsteps on the observation deck, but when I'd shine my flashlight out there, nothing was visible but darkness. I woke up around 5 a.m. to absolute silence. The wind had stopped completely. I made coffee and watched the sunrise turn the distant mountains gold. This was what I'd signed up for, this peaceful isolation. I spent the day familiarizing myself with the fire-spotting equipment, checking sight lines, and recording weather observations in the logbook. At 8 p.m., I tried Sister Station 12 again. This time I got a response. Just static and what sounded like breathing, then silence. I logged it and tried not to think about it too hard. The supply drop came right on schedule the next morning. A small helicopter approached from the east, hovered briefly, and dropped a large crate on the helipad about 50 yards from the tower. The pilot waved but didn't land. Inside the crate were food supplies, water purification tablets, batteries, and oddly, a box of rifle ammunition. I checked the storage locker and found an old bolt-action rifle that I hadn't noticed before. Why would a fire lookout need a rifle? Days passed in a similar pattern. Wake up, check for smoke, log weather conditions, try to reach Sister Station 12, usually without success. Go to sleep to the sound of strange noises on the observation deck. After a week, I decided to hike to Sister Station 12 myself. According to my map, it was only about 5 miles away, visible on a neighboring peak. I set out early, taking water, food, the rifle, just in case, and a compass. The hike was peaceful at first, but as I got deeper into the forest, things started feeling wrong. The trees seemed to lean inward, creating an unnatural tunnel effect. About 2 miles in, I found something that made my blood run cold. A freshly killed deer, completely skinned, hanging from a tree branch. No hunter would leave behind the meat. This was something else. I considered turning back but decided to press on. That's when I saw him, a man standing among the trees about 50 yards ahead. He was tall, thin, wearing what looked like old-fashioned clothes. When he saw me, he called out something in a language I didn't recognize. "Hello?" I called back, my hand instinctively tightening on the rifle. "Are you from Sister Station 12? The man took a step toward me, still speaking rapidly in that strange language. His movements were jerky, almost mechanical. Then, mid-sentence, he collapsed, just fell straight down like someone had cut his strings. I ran to where he'd fallen, but when I got there, no one, nothing. Not even footprints in the soft forest floor. I stood there for a long time, rifle ready, scanning the trees. Finally, I decided to continue to Sister Station 12. I needed answers. An hour later, I reached a clearing and stopped, confused. Ahead of me was a lookout tower, identical to mine in every detail. Same construction, same observation deck, same helipad nearby. According to my compass and map, I'd been hiking in a straight line away from my station. I couldn't possibly be back where I started. I approached cautiously. The door was locked. Through the windows I could see the same layout as my tower: desk, radio, bed. even a dark stain on the floor, but no one was inside. That's when I noticed the sign next to the door. Sentinel Peak Lookout Station. Not Sister Station 12. Somehow, impossibly, I'd circled back to my own tower, but I hadn't. I'd maintained a straight heading the entire time. I checked my compass again. It was spinning wildly now, the needle rotating continuously. I looked up at the sun to get my bearings and noticed something else wrong. It was in the same position as when I'd left that morning. According to my watch, I'd been hiking for over 3 hours. The sun should have moved. I ran back to my tower, or what I thought was my tower, in a panic. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. My coffee mug was still on the desk. My book was open to the same page. This was impossible. That night, I broke rule number 5. I opened the safe under the desk. Inside was a single VHS tape labeled for Lookout 13. I didn't have a VHS player, but there was an old TV VCR combo unit in a storage closet that I hadn't noticed before. I plugged it in and inserted the tape. The screen flickered to life, showing the inside of the lookout, my lookout. A man sat at the desk, looking at the camera. With a shock, I realized he looked like me, but older, with a beard and hollow eyes. "If you're watching this, you're the new Lookout 13, he said. His voice sounded exactly like mine, but rougher, tired. "I was Lookout 13 before you, and before me was another, and before him another. We're all the same person. We're all stuck in this loop." He explained that he'd been at the lookout for what felt like years, that the sister station never answers because it doesn't exist. It's just another version of our tower in another time frame, that the strange man in the woods is Lookout 12, speaking a language that evolved after centuries in isolation. "I've tried everything to escape," my older self continued. "Hiking out doesn't work. You just circle back. The helicopter only comes for supply drops. The radio only receives what they want you to hear." He leaned closer to the camera. "This is an experiment. They're watching us, studying how isolation affects the human mind across different temporal planes." The tape cut to static, then resumed with an even older version of me, wild-eyed and ranting about ruptures in reality and sacrifices to maintain the loop. Then static again. I shut it off, my heart pounding in my chest. This couldn't be real. It was a sick joke, or I was hallucinating from the isolation. I had to get out. I grabbed my backpack and the rifle and ran out into the night, breaking rule number 1. As soon as I stepped outside, I saw them, lights in the forest, moving between the trees. Dozens of them, and voices whispering in that same strange language the man had spoken. I made a decision. If I couldn't escape, I'd break the cycle. I went back inside, gathered every flammable liquid I could find, lamp oil, alcohol, gasoline from the emergency generator, and splashed it everywhere. Then I took the VHS tape, recorded my own message over the previous ones, explaining what I was about to do, and put it back in the safe. I lit a match and dropped it on the gasoline-soaked floor. The fire caught immediately, racing across the room. I grabbed the rifle and ran. The forest was alive with movement now. Shadows darted between trees. That strange language echoed all around me. I ran blindly, firing the rifle into the darkness whenever a shadow got too close. I collided with someone, the same tall, thin man I'd seen earlier. Up close, I could see his face clearly in the moonlight. It was me, or would-be me, aged beyond recognition, with wild eyes and skin like parchment. He grabbed my arm, babbling in that strange language, pulling me back toward the burning tower. I panicked and fired the rifle. He fell, a look of shock on his face. I knelt beside him, horrified at what I'd done. That's when I saw it, a tattoo on his chest, revealed by his torn shirt, the Roman numeral soothe, lookout 12. In the distance, I heard the helicopter coming. I stumbled to the helipad and fired all 3 emergency flares into the sky, red, blue, and green together. The helicopter spotted me and landed. 2 men in military-style uniforms jumped out. "Subject 13 is attempting to break containment," one said into a radio. "Tower is compromised. Extracting now." I tried to run, but they caught me easily. One of them jabbed a needle into my arm and darkness took me. I woke up in what looked like a military hospital. A doctor in a lab coat was reviewing a chart at the foot of my bed. "Where am I?" I demanded. "Safe," he replied without looking up. "You had an episode at the lookout station. Fire hallucinations are common among first-timers. The isolation plays tricks on the mind." "Bullshit," I said. "I saw the tape. I know what you're doing up there." He finally looked at me, his expression carefully neutral. "What we're doing is important work, Marcus. Research that will help us understand the human mind's relationship with time and space. You were specially selected because of your psychological profile." "I killed him," I whispered. "Lookout 12. I shot him." "No one died," the doctor said smoothly. "The station was damaged, but we've already begun repairs. In fact, we'd like to offer you the position again for next season. Your experience makes you even more valuable to the project." He slid a contract across the table. I stared at it in disbelief. "You think I'd go back there after everything that happened?" "We think you'll sign because you need to know the truth," he said simply. "The curiosity will eat at you until you do." He was right. Even as I sat there, I was already wondering what was real, what was hallucination, what happens to Lookout 14, and what's in the safe besides the tape. I signed the contract. I know it was a mistake, but I had to know. I have 3 months before I return to Sentinel Peak. 3 months to prepare, to plan, to figure out how to break the loop for good. If you're reading this and I don't come back, at least someone will know what happened at Sentinel Peak. And if you ever get offered a job as a fire lookout there, run. Run as far and as fast as you can. Because once you're part of the loop, there's no escape. There's only the tower, the forest, and the endless, impossible circling back to where you began. I still can't believe I'm typing this out, but I need to get it off my chest. It's been 3 months since that night, and I haven't slept properly since. My hands are shaking just thinking about it again. I was 19, working at Haverbrook Grocery off exit 42. It's one of those big 24-hour places that caters to truckers and night travelers since we're right off the interstate. Nothing special about it from the outside, just your typical fluorescent-lit box store with those squeaky tile floors and freezer sections that always seem to be leaking somewhere. I'd been working there about 6 months, mostly afternoon shifts. The pay wasn't great, but the schedule worked around my community college classes. My manager was this old guy everyone just called the boss. Never his actual name. He was probably in his 60s, always wore the same faded blue vest, and kept to himself. The weird thing about him was how he'd sometimes just appear behind you without making a sound. Like, you'd be restocking the cereal aisle, turn around, and bam! There he was, watching. Anyway, our night shift cashier was this woman named Claire. Small lady, maybe 5'2", with this silver-streaked hair always pulled back in a tight bun. She'd been working nights for like 20 years straight. Only nights. Nobody really knew much about her personal life, but she was efficient and kept to herself. The boss seemed to respect her more than anyone else. So, last Wednesday, I'm clocking out around 8 p.m. when I overhear the boss on the phone. His voice sounds worried, which was unusual for him. When he hangs up, He tells our shift supervisor that Claire's been hospitalized with pneumonia and would be out for at least a week. They start discussing who could cover the night shift, and without thinking, I volunteer. I needed the extra money, and honestly, I was curious. The night shift had this weird mystique around it. There were all these rumors about why nobody lasted there except Claire. The shift supervisor, Mark, looked at me like I'd just volunteered to jump into a shark tank. You sure about that, Alex? Night shift is different. The boss studied me for a long moment before nodding. Be here at 10 p.m. sharp. I'll give you the rundown. As I was leaving, this older stock boy named Jerry grabbed my arm. Don't do it, man. Remember Paul? Paul was this guy who had covered night shift for a week last year. Story goes he had some kind of breakdown on his fifth night, started screaming about faces in the produce section and quit on the spot. I'd always figured he was on something, but the way Jerry was looking at me made my stomach tighten a little. I brushed him off. It's just a grocery store, dude. How bad could it be? When I showed up that night, the store was nearly empty, just a couple of late shoppers finishing up. The boss was waiting for me at the main register, holding an envelope. Listen carefully, he said, handing it to me. Claire follows these rules to the letter. That's why she's lasted 20 years. Follow them exactly, and you'll be fine. The envelope was sealed with red wax, like something from another century. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 6 rules typed out. 1. Never leave the register area between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. except to use the employee restroom directly behind the service desk. 2. Never enter the storage area after 10:30 p.m. 3. If you hear merchandise falling in aisles 7-12, ignore it. Do not investigate. 4. At midnight, an elderly woman named Barbara will need assistance shopping. Help her find what she needs, but do not look directly at her face. Address her as ma'am only. 5. If a customer approaches while crying, wish them well and tell them to have a pleasant evening. Nothing more. 6. If music begins playing over the store radio system after 2 a.m., do not attempt to turn it off or adjust the volume. I read the list twice, thinking it was some kind of joke, hazing the new night shift guy. But the boss wasn't smiling. Questions? He asked. Yeah, about 1 million. What's with Barbara? Why can't I look at her face? He sighed. Some things are better left unexplained. Just follow the rules. I'll be back at 6 a.m. And then he left, just like that. I was alone in this massive store with a list of cryptic rules that made no sense. The first hour was fine. A few customers came through, truck drivers mostly, grabbing energy drinks and snacks. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and everything felt normal enough, just emptier and quieter than I was used to. At 11:30 p.m., I heard the first crash. It came from aisle 9, the pasta section. It sounded like multiple boxes hitting the floor, then a dragging sound. My first instinct was to check it out, but then I remembered rule number 3. I stayed put, my heart suddenly pounding in my chest. The dragging sound continued for almost a minute, then silence. 10 minutes later, another crash from aisle 11. This time, it sounded heavier, like something large had fallen. I gripped the edge of the counter, forcing myself to stay at the register. At 11:55 p.m., the automatic doors at the entrance slid open. I looked up, expecting a customer, but no one came in. The doors just stood open for about 30 seconds, then closed again. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. Midnight came, and I was watching the door like a hawk. Right on cue, they opened again. This time, a small figure shuffled in. It was an elderly woman in a long gray coat, her white hair visible under a faded red scarf. She was hunched over a shopping cart, moving slowly. I kept my eyes on her hands, gnarled, spotted with age, as she approached. "Good evening, ma'am," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can I help you find anything tonight?" Her voice was like dry leaves rustling. "Yes, please. I need assistance." I walked around the counter, careful to keep my gaze down. We moved through the store together, her cart wheels squeaking on the tile. She asked for specific items: dented cans of soup, slightly browned bananas, bread that was a day past its sell-by date. All the stuff we usually pulled from shelves. "Ma'am, I can get you fresher items," I offered, reaching for a better bunch of bananas. Her hand shot out and gripped my wrist. Her skin felt ice-cold and somehow wrong. Too smooth in some places, rough like sandpaper in others. "I want these," she said, her voice suddenly deeper. "These are ripening, changing, like me." My heart was hammering in my chest. I made the mistake of glancing up, not at her face directly, but high enough to see her neck. There was something off about the way her scarf sat, like it wasn't resting on anything solid beneath. We continued shopping, my eyes firmly on the floor. She selected more items, all damaged or expired. Finally, she said she was finished, and we returned to the register. As I scanned her items, I felt her leaning over the counter, getting closer. The air around her smelled like wet soil and something metallic. "You're new," she said. "Not like Claire. Claire knows not to look." My hands were shaking so badly I dropped a can. When I bent to pick it up, I instinctively looked up and caught a glimpse under her scarf. There was no face, just a swirling darkness where features should be, like looking into a hole in reality itself. I jerked back, hitting my head on the counter edge. "You looked," she hissed, the darkness seeming to expand. "You weren't supposed to look." "I'm sorry, ma'am," I stammered, scrambling back to the register. "It was an accident." She stood there for what felt like forever, that darkness churning where her face should be. Finally, she took her bags. "Claire never looks," she repeated. "Remember that next time, or there won't be a next time." She shuffled toward the exit, but just before the doors, she turned slightly. "Tell Claire I miss her." After she left, I had to sit down behind the counter. My legs were shaking too badly to stand. I checked the time, only 12:40 a.m. The night was still young. Around 1:30 a.m., a guy in a plaid jacket came in. Normal-looking dude, maybe mid-30s, with a thick beard. He grabbed a cart and started shopping normally. I began to relax a little, until I noticed he was crying. Silent tears were streaming down his face as he methodically selected items and placed them in his cart. When he approached the register, I remembered rule number 5. My mouth went dry. "Will this be all, sir?" I asked, scanning his items. "Just normal groceries, nothing weird like Barbara's?" He nodded, still crying. I could smell something on him now, like rotten eggs or sulfur. "That'll be $42.78, I said, bagging his items. He handed me exact change, his fingers lingering a bit too long against mine. They felt hot, almost burning. I remembered the rule. "Have a pleasant evening, sir. I wish you well." His crying stopped instantly. He looked up at me, and his eyes weren't human anymore. They were solid black, like shark eyes. "You didn't mean that," he said, his voice suddenly different, deeper, with a strange echo. "I can tell you didn't mean it." The fluorescent lights above us flickered. His mouth opened in a smile that was too wide, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. I did mean it," I stammered. "I wish you well, sir. Have a pleasant evening." "Liar!" he roared, his voice distorting completely. He reached across the counter, his arms stretching impossibly long, and grabbed my shirt. His fingers burned through the fabric, searing my skin. "Claire means it," he growled. Claire always means it. He dragged me halfway across the counter. Up close, his skin looked wrong, like it was a mask that didn't quite fit. The smell of sulfur was overwhelming. I was certain I was going to die. This thing, whatever it was going to kill me right there in the store. But then the automatic doors opened and the boss walked in. The creature froze, its black eyes darting to the entrance. The boss stood there, looking completely unsurprised by what was happening. "It's not your time yet," the boss said calmly. "He's new." The creature hissed, releasing me. I fell back against the register, clutching my burned chest. "This one doesn't belong here," it snarled, but it was backing away. "Perhaps not," the boss replied. "But that's not for you to decide." The creature's form seemed to shimmer, like heat rising off pavement. It backed toward the exit, leaving its groceries behind. Just before it reached the doors, it pulled something from its pocket and tossed it on the floor, a crushed pack of cigarettes. Then it was gone. The boss walked over and picked up the cigarette pack. "You're early," I gasped, still trying to catch my breath. "I had a feeling," he said, pocketing the cigarettes. "You didn't follow the rules exactly, did you?" I told him what happened with Barbara and the crying man. He nodded, unsurprised. "You're lucky. Most don't survive their first mistake." "What the hell is going on here?" I demanded. "What are those things?" The boss leaned against the counter. "This store sits at a crossroads, not just physically on the highway, but otherwise. Places like this attract things that exist in the in-between. Claire understands this. She's learned to navigate it. And you just throw new people into this without warning?" I was angry now, the fear giving way to rage. "Would you have believed me?" he asked simply. "Besides, the rules are there for your protection. Follow them, and you're safe." I worked the rest of the night in a daze. Nothing else happened. No more crashes in the aisles, no more strange customers. At 6 a.m. sharp, my replacement arrived, looking completely normal and unaware. I quit that day, walked out, and never looked back. 3 months later, I still have nightmares about Barbara's non-face and that creature's too wide smile. I still have a perfect handprint burned into my chest that no doctor can explain. I drove by the store last week. Claire's back at work now. I saw her through the window, ringing up customers with that efficient, distant expression she always has. Now I understand why she's worked that shift for 20 years. She knows how to handle what comes through those doors at night. And sometimes when I'm driving at night and pass a 24-hour store glowing on some lonely stretch of road, I wonder how many other places like Haverbrook exist, and how many other night shift workers are guardians of crossroads they never asked to protect. I still can't believe what happened to me last month. I just needed to write this down somewhere, because I'm honestly losing my mind trying to process it all. I've been a wildlife removal specialist for almost 9 years now in the outskirts of Atlanta. I handle everything from raccoons in attics to the occasional alligator that wanders too far north. Nothing in my career prepared me for what happened in those mountains. It started with an email that landed in my inbox on a Tuesday morning. The subject line read, "Urgent, professional wildlife expert needed for special capture, $650 daily pay." Now, my normal rate is about $200 a day, depending on the job, so this immediately caught my attention. The email was from a guy named Ross Tebbets. He explained that he and his cousin Eli had spotted what they believed was a Sasquatch in the North Georgia mountains, and they needed someone with professional wildlife containment experience to help them capture it. My first instinct was to delete the email as spam or some kind of joke. Bigfoot hunters? Seriously? But then I saw the pay offer again, $650 per day, with a minimum 3-day contract, all expenses paid. That was almost $2,000 for a long weekend of what would probably be nothing more than babysitting a couple of delusional hillbillies. I'd been struggling to make ends meet that month. My truck needed new tires, and I had just paid an unexpected medical bill. So against my better judgment, I replied to Ross, thinking I'd at least hear him out. We spoke on the phone that evening. Ross talked a mile a minute, his voice high-pitched with excitement. He said they had evidence, footprints, broken branches, and even some blurry photos. He kept saying things like, as Theodore Roosevelt once said, "Believe you can and you're halfway there," and "We're on the precipice of making history, my friend." I barely got a word in edgewise. He wanted me there that Friday and offered to pay half my fee up front through PayPal. I figured, what the hell, worst case scenario, I'd get a paid camping trip and some funny stories to tell. The PayPal payment cleared Wednesday morning. I packed my truck with my usual gear, cages, nets, tranquilizer gun with sedatives approved for large mammals, protective clothing, first aid supplies, and camping equipment. I told my girlfriend I was heading up to North Georgia for a job, but I was too embarrassed to tell her what it really was. Friday morning, I drove up to the address Ross had given me, a small wooden cabin near the Georgia-North Carolina border, so remote that my GPS lost signal about 2 miles before I reached it. I had to navigate using the crude hand-drawn map Ross had emailed me. The cabin belonged to Eli, Ross's cousin. It was exactly what you'd expect, a weathered wooden structure with a small porch surrounded by dense forest. When I pulled up, Ross burst out of the front door like an excited kid on Christmas morning. He was shorter than I expected, maybe 5'6", pudgy with thinning brown hair and thick glasses. He wore cargo pants with about 20 pockets and a T-shirt that read, "Believe," with a silhouette of Bigfoot. "The man of the hour," he shouted, rushing to my truck. As Benjamin Franklin said, "By failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail. And we, sir, are prepared to succeed." Eli came out after him, moving much slower. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with leathery skin and a gray beard that reached halfway down his chest. He wore faded overalls and just nodded at me without speaking. Ross helped me unload my equipment, chattering the entire time about all the research he'd done, all the Bigfoot documentaries he'd watched, and how this was going to make us all famous. Eli mostly stood by and occasionally spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Eli, here's the one who's seen it 3 times now," Ross explained. "Tell him, Eli." Eli finally spoke, his voice like gravel. "Seen something, that's for damn sure. Tall as a pine and stinks like death wrapped in shit." That was pretty much the extent of Eli's contribution to the conversation. Inside the cabin, Ross had transformed one wall into what he called his research center. It was covered with maps, printed photos of supposed Bigfoot sightings, and sticky notes with scribbled observations. He had a table full of equipment, too: night vision goggles, high-powered flashlights, trail cameras, and what looked like homemade traps. "Now," Ross said, pulling out a detailed topographical map. "Eli spotted the creature mainly in this area here." He pointed to a circled region about 2 miles from the cabin. "It's rough terrain, lots of caves and dense forest. Perfect Sasquatch habitat according to all the literature." I tried to sound professional as I asked about the creature's behavior, size, and patterns, treating it like any other wildlife call. Ross seemed delighted by my questions, while Eli just kept nodding and occasionally adding details like "moves quiet for something so big" and "smells like a possum died inside another possum." We spent that afternoon going over their evidence. Most of it was what I expected. Blurry photos of shadows, recordings of what could have been anything from a bear to the wind, and plaster casts of footprints that honestly looked man-made to me. But I kept my opinions to myself. I was getting paid either way. The plan was to camp near the area where the sightings had occurred and set up cameras and traps. We would stay for 3 days and nights. Ross had all kinds of theories about Bigfoot behavior, mostly based on TV shows and internet forums. Eli seemed less concerned with theories and more with practical matters, like making sure we had enough ammunition. Ammunition? I asked. I thought we were trying to capture this thing, not kill it. Better to have and not need, Eli muttered. Ross jumped in. Just a precaution. As Theodore Roosevelt also said, speak softly and carry a big stick, though I don't think he meant guns specifically. We loaded up Eli's beat-up old pickup truck with our gear and headed deeper into the woods. The terrain got rough quickly, and eventually we had to park and continue on foot. Eli knew these woods like the back of his hand and led us through without hesitation. As we hiked, I started to notice how truly isolated we were. The forest was dense, old growth, the kind of place where you could easily get lost and never be found. It was beautiful, but unsettling. About 2 hours in, we reached a small clearing beside a creek. "This is where we'll set up base camp," Ross announced. "I've got these special tent stakes that are supposedly Sasquatch-proof." I was helping set up the tents when I heard voices coming through the trees. Eli immediately grabbed his rifle and Ross froze mid-sentence about Sasquatch mating habits. 3 men emerged into the clearing. I recognized one of them immediately, Kenny Johnson, another wildlife removal specialist from the Atlanta area and my main competition. He was a big guy with a permanent sneer who had undercut me on jobs before. With him were 2 older men I didn't know. "Well, I'll be damned," Kenny said when he saw me. "What the hell are you doing out here?" Before I could answer, Ross stepped forward. "This is private business. We've hired professional help." One of the older men with Kenny spat on the ground. "Ain't private if it's on public land, boy. And sides, Eli here told Milton all about your Sasquatch." He nodded toward the other man with Kenny. Eli looked guilty. "Might have mentioned something when we was drinking last month." It turned out that Eli had drunkenly told his friend Milton about the Sasquatch sightings. Milton had then assembled his own team, himself, his brother-in-law Boyd, the man who'd spat, and Kenny, who they'd found online, just like Ross had found me. Ross was furious. "You've compromised the entire operation. As Sun Tzu said, let your plans be dark and impenetrable as night." Kenny laughed. "Are you for real, man?" He turned to me. "You actually taking money for this Bigfoot bullshit?" I shrugged. "Same as you, apparently." The situation was tense, but eventually we reached an uneasy truce. There was enough room in the clearing for 2 camps, and if anything was actually found, we'd cross that bridge when we came to it, as Ross repeatedly said. I could tell he was plotting something, though. He kept whispering to Eli and shooting dirty looks at the other group. We spent the rest of the daylight hours setting up cameras and traps. Kenny and I kept our distance from each other, but I could feel him watching me, probably thinking the same thing I was, that we were both idiots taking money from gullible Bigfoot hunters. As night fell, things got weird. We had a campfire going, and both groups sat around it, maintaining the uneasy truce. The forest seemed unnaturally quiet. No owls, no rustling, nothing. I'd spent plenty of nights in the woods before, and this silence was unsettling. Then the smell hit. It was exactly as Eli had described, like death wrapped in shit. It was so sudden and intense that Milton actually vomited. Boyd jumped up with his rifle, spinning in circles, trying to see into the darkness beyond our firelight. "It's here," Eli whispered, his usually impassive face now tight with fear. Ross was frantically trying to get his night vision goggles working, dropping batteries in his excitement. Kenny had gone completely pale, all his earlier mockery forgotten. Then we heard it, a low, rumbling sound that wasn't quite a growl, but definitely wasn't human. It seemed to come from all around us. "Get the cameras!" Ross hissed at me. I fumbled with one of the digital cameras, trying to point it in the direction of the sound, but it was impossible to pinpoint. The smell was getting stronger, making my eyes water. That's when the rock came flying out of the darkness. It wasn't big, maybe the size of a baseball, but it hit Boyd right in the temple with a sickening crack. He dropped like a stone, falling partially into our campfire. His clothes caught immediately. I still have nightmares about what happened next. Nobody moved, not one of us. We all just sat there, paralyzed, as Boyd's body burned. I don't know if he was already dead from the rock or if he burned alive. The smell of burning flesh mixed with that awful stench from the woods. Something was out there in the dark, watching us. And somehow, we all knew that the slightest movement would bring it charging into our camp. We sat like that for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The sounds from the darkness changed. Now there were wet, smacking noises, like something feeding. Milton was silently crying, tears streaming down his face. Kenny had pissed himself. Ross was mouthing words, quotes probably, but no sound came out. Eli just stared into the darkness, his rifle forgotten in his lap. Eventually the noises stopped. The smell gradually faded. None of us slept that night. We sat in a circle, facing outward, weapons ready. Boyd's charred body lay where it had fallen, none of us brave enough to move it. When dawn finally broke, we could see that something had dragged large branches and rocks to form a rough circle around our clearing during the night, like it had been marking territory. The other group wanted to leave immediately. Milton was hysterical about Boyd, alternating between sobbing and rage. "That thing killed my brother. We gotta kill it back." Kenny just wanted out, kept saying he never signed up for this shit. But Ross was more determined than ever. This is unprecedented documentation of Sasquatch behavior. The rock throwing, the territorial marking. It's exactly as described in the Patterson-Gimlin encounter of 1967. Somehow, incredibly, we stayed. We buried what was left of Boyd in a shallow grave, and Ross convinced everyone that we needed to find the creature's lair. Eli thought he knew where it might be, a system of caves about a mile further up the mountain. Looking back, I should have left right then. I should have hiked back to Eli's truck and gotten the hell out of there. But I didn't. Part of it was shock, I think. Part of it was some stupid sense of obligation since I'd taken Ross's money. And part of it, if I'm being honest, was curiosity. I'd seen some strange things in my years of wildlife work, but nothing like this. We packed up some basic gear and headed toward the caves. The forest seemed different now, threatening. Every snapping twig made us jump. The two groups stayed together out of necessity, but the tension was thick. Milton kept muttering about revenge. Kenny kept his handgun drawn the entire time. Ross wouldn't shut up about making history, and Eli led the way in silence, his face grim. The cave system was about a mile uphill from our camp. The entrance was partially hidden behind a fallen tree, but the smell coming from it was unmistakable. That same death-shit stench from the night before, but 10 times stronger. "This is it," Eli whispered. "It's in there." Ross started setting up cameras at the entrance, his hands shaking with excitement. Kenny and I exchanged a look. For the first time, we were on the same page. This was bad news. Milton suddenly shoved past everyone, raising his rifle. "I'm gonna kill that son of a bitch!" Kenny grabbed his arm. "Are you crazy? We don't know what's in there." They struggled, and the rifle went off. The shot echoed through the forest, deafening us momentarily. When my hearing cleared, Milton was screaming. Kenny had somehow shot his hand, and it was hanging by a thread of skin. "You shot me! You fucking shot me!" Milton shrieked, clutching his wrist. Before anyone could respond, a deep guttural roar came from inside the cave. It was like nothing I've ever heard. Not a bear, not a mountain lion, not anything I recognized. It made the hair on my neck stand up. Milton stopped screaming. His face went slack. And then, to my horror, he started singing. It was an old hymn, Amazing Grace, but all wrong, too fast, too high-pitched. He walked toward the cave entrance, still singing, blood pouring from his ruined hand. "Milton, no!" I shouted, but it was like he couldn't hear me. He disappeared into the darkness of the cave. His singing echoed for a few seconds, then abruptly stopped. There was a wet, tearing sound, then silence. We all stood frozen. Then Ross did something incredibly stupid. He took out a cigarette, lit it, and approached the cave entrance. Hello?" he called into the darkness. "We come in peace. We just want to document you for science." He held out the cigarette like an offering. "Do you want to smoke?" That's when it emerged. I've spent weeks trying to make sense of what I saw. My brain wants to process it as a bear, or a man in a suit, or anything familiar. But it wasn't. It was at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark reddish-brown hair, but with patches of skin showing through like it had some kind of mange. Its face was the worst part, almost human but wrong, with a protruding jaw and small, deep-set eyes that reflected the sunlight like a cat's. Milton's blood covered its chest and enormous hands, each finger ending in a claw-like nail. Ross stood there with his cigarette extended, his face frozen in a terrified smile. The creature reached out one massive hand and closed it around Ross's entire head. I heard the crunch of his skull compressing, saw his legs kick wildly for a few seconds, then go limp. Eli was the first to react. "Run!" he screamed, firing his rifle at the creature. The shot seemed to piss it off more than hurt it. Kenny, Eli, and I sprinted back down the trail. I could hear the creature crashing through the underbrush behind us. Kenny was the fastest, pulling ahead quickly. Eli was falling behind, his older legs struggling with the rough terrain. I remembered something from my wildlife training. Predators track by scent. I had a bottle of fox urine in my pack that I used to mask my scent when approaching trap sites. I grabbed it, unscrewed the cap, and poured it over myself as I ran. The stench was overwhelming, but I didn't care. "Eli!" I shouted, tossing him the half-empty bottle. "Cover yourself in this and roll in the dirt." He caught it and did as I said without question. Kenny was too far ahead to hear me. We kept running, now zigzagging through the trees to break the line of sight. I could still hear the creature behind us, but it seemed confused, stopping occasionally to sniff the air. We came to a small ravine filled with dense underbrush. "In here," I gasped to Eli, diving into the bushes. He followed. We lay completely still, trying to control our breathing. The bushes, as it turned out, were covered in fire ants, which immediately began crawling all over us and biting. I clenched my teeth against the pain, knowing that the slightest sound could give us away. The creature arrived at the ravine a minute later. It stood so close that I could see the mud caked on its feet through the leaves. It sniffed the air, turning its head back and forth. Then it moved on, following Kenny's scent. About 2 minutes later, we heard Kenny scream. It was distant but clear, a scream of pure terror cut off abruptly. Eli and I stayed hidden for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. The fire ants were a torment, but fear kept us still. Finally, Eli tapped my shoulder and pointed. We slowly crept out of our hiding place and took a circuitous route back toward his cabin, avoiding the trail completely. We found Kenny's body about halfway back. He had gotten caught in one of our own bear traps and couldn't free himself. The creature had torn his head clean off. I vomited at the sight, but Eli just crossed himself and moved on. By some miracle, we made it back to Eli's cabin as dusk was falling. We immediately began boarding up the windows, barricading the door, gathering whatever weapons Eli had in the house. He had plenty. 2 more rifles, a shotgun, and a revolver, plus enough ammunition to start a small war. "That thing's gonna come for us," Eli said, breaking his usual silence. "It knows where I live. It's been watching me for months." I was trying to get my phone to work, but there was no signal. Eli didn't have a landline. We were completely cut off. Night fell, and with it came that familiar stench. The creature was outside. We could hear it circling the cabin, occasionally bumping against the walls like it was testing for weaknesses. The fire, I suddenly remembered. At the campsite. It stayed away from the fire. Eli nodded. "Makes sense. Animals fear fire." We had limited options. The cabin was made of wood. Setting a fire inside would be suicide, but Eli had something that might help. "Got about 30 gallons of moonshine in the shed out back," he said. "Enough alcohol to make some serious flames." The problem was getting to the shed. It was only about 20 yards from the back door, but with that thing out there, it might as well have been a mile. We formulated a plan. I would take Eli's shotgun and fire it out the front door to draw the creature to that side of the cabin. Eli would then slip out the back and run to the shed. Once he had the moonshine, I would cover his return. It went wrong almost immediately. I fired the shotgun as planned, and we heard the creature rush to the front of the cabin. Eli slipped out the back door and made it to the shed. But as he was coming back, struggling with a wooden crate full of mason jars full of clear liquid, the creature somehow realized the trick. It circled the cabin faster than seemed possible and caught Eli in the open. What happened next still haunts me. The creature picked up an old truck tire that was leaning against the shed and threw it at Eli like it was a frisbee. The tire hit him directly in the chest with such force that I heard his ribs shatter from inside the cabin. He went down hard, the moonshine jars breaking and spilling around him. I fired the shotgun through the back window, more out of desperation than any hope of helping. The creature flinched but didn't retreat. It approached Eli's broken body slowly, almost curiously. Then I had an idea. I ran to the kitchen and found a lighter. I tore a strip from my shirt, stuffed it into one of Eli's whiskey bottles to make a crude Molotov cocktail, and lit it. I threw it as hard as I could through the broken window. It landed near the spilled moonshine, which caught fire immediately. The flames spread rapidly, igniting the puddles of alcohol around Eli's body and racing toward the creature. For the first time it showed fear, backing away from the spreading fire with a howl that shook the cabin. I made more Molotov cocktails and threw them in all directions, setting the area around the cabin ablaze. The dry underbrush caught quickly, and soon there was a ring of fire surrounding us. The creature retreated into the darkness, its howls growing more distant. I knew the fire would eventually reach the cabin. I grabbed Eli's truck keys, wrapped myself in a wet blanket, and made a run for his pickup. The heat was intense, singeing my eyebrows and hair, but I made it. The truck started on the first try, and I crashed through the burning underbrush, heading down the mountain road as fast as I dared. About a mile down, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw the orange glow of the growing forest fire. I felt sick knowing Eli's body was back there, but there was nothing I could do. I drove like a madman, chugging the remains of Eli's whiskey to steady my nerves. When I finally reached civilization, I went straight to the hospital. I was covered in fire ant bites, had second-degree burns on my arms and face, and was in shock. The doctors treated my injuries while I babbled about what had happened. They sedated me, and when I woke up, there were 2 police officers in my room. I was under arrest for DUI and suspected arson. The forest fire had grown to cover almost 200 acres before being contained. Nobody believed my story. They found the remains of Eli's cabin and his body, attributing his death to the fire. They never found Kenny, Ross, Milton, or Boyd. The official explanation was that I had gotten drunk with Eli, accidentally started a fire, and fled the scene. I've been out on bail for 3 weeks now, waiting for my court date. I've tried contacting wildlife authorities, park rangers, even university anthropology departments, but no one will listen. They all think I'm either lying to cover up my crimes or that I had some kind of psychotic break. Maybe they're right. Maybe I did. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I can smell that death shit stench in my apartment. I check the locks over and over. I can't sleep without the lights on. I don't know what we encountered in those mountains. I don't know if it was a Sasquatch or something else entirely. All I know is that it was real. It was intelligent, and it's still out there. And sometimes, when the wind is right, I swear I can hear it howling in the distance, even here in the city. I'm sitting on my couch right now, legs pulled up against my chest, typing this out on my phone because I can't sleep. Again. It's been almost 3 weeks since I quit my job at Milton's gas and convenience store, and I still can't shake what happened there. I don't know if writing this will help, but I need to tell someone. It started because I needed money for community college. I'd moved to this small town near Black Ridge National Forest to live with my aunt after my mom got sick. Tuition for my vet assistant program wasn't cheap, and minimum wage jobs were scarce. When I saw the Help Wanted sign at Milton's with 20 HR night shift scrawled in faded marker, it seemed too good to be true. The place was this old, run-down gas station about 5 miles outside town, right at the edge of the forest where the main highway cuts through. 2 ancient pumps out front, a small convenience store section, and a bulletin board covered with flyers by the door. The owner, Milton Jackson, had to be at least 75, a skinny guy with wisps of white hair and these intense blue eyes that felt like they were looking through you. The interview lasted maybe 5 minutes. He asked if I was afraid of the dark. I said no. If I could stay awake all night, I said yes. And if I believed in things I couldn't explain, I laughed awkwardly and said I was open-minded. He didn't smile back. He just nodded and said I'd start that night. My first shift was weird from the beginning. Milton showed me the basics, how to work the ancient register, where supplies were kept, which items needed restocking, normal stuff. But then he handed me this beat-up red notebook with "Always Keep Watch" written on the cover in what looked like Sharpie. "Read this once I leave," he said. "Follow it exactly. No exceptions." I figured it was some kind of employee manual, maybe inventory procedures or something. I was wrong, so wrong. Around 10 p.m., Milton gathered his things to leave. At the door, he turned back. "3 things, Cooper," he said. "First, Tic-Tac will let you know when someone's coming. Second, if you see old Sarge, listen to him. And third," he paused, his face deadly serious, "don't let anyone wearing red go into the forest at night, especially not to Red Rock Canyon." Before I could ask any questions, he was gone, leaving me alone in the flickering fluorescent light of the empty store. I opened the notebook. The first pages were normal enough: opening procedures, closing procedures, emergency contacts. Then it got weird. There were detailed instructions about the Watcher, who supposedly lived in the woods, warnings about the color red acting as some kind of beacon, instructions for different codes. Code purple meant I needed to evacuate anyone in the store immediately. Code black meant I should lock myself in the storage room and not come out until morning, no matter what I heard. I thought it was a joke, some kind of hazing ritual for the new guy. Around midnight, a massive black and white crow landed on the windowsill outside. It stared at me, then tapped its beak against the glass 3 times. Tick, tack, tick. My heart nearly stopped when headlights swept across the parking lot a minute later. A blue Honda pulled up to pump 2. A woman in hiking gear got out, filled her tank, then came inside. She had a red jacket tied around her waist. My mouth went dry. I tried to act normal as she picked up a few energy bars and a bottle of water. "Camping tonight?" I asked as I rang her up. "Yeah, heading up to Red Rock Canyon," she said. "Supposed to be beautiful views at sunrise." I felt cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. According to Milton's notebook, I was supposed to stop her. But how? She'd think I was crazy. Actually, that area's closed tonight," I lied. "Rangers found some, bear activity up there." She frowned. "That's weird. The website didn't say anything." "Yeah, it just happened today. They haven't updated it yet." She shrugged. "I'll be fine. I've camped in bear country before." As she headed for the door, I panicked. "Wait! At least don't wear that red jacket. Bears are attracted to bright colors." She looked at me like I was insane. "Thanks for the concern, but I'll be fine." And she left. I watched her drive away, my stomach in knots. 3 days later, her face was on a missing persons flyer on our bulletin board. Same red jacket in the photo. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Every single missing person flyer on that board showed someone wearing something red: a hat, a backpack, a shirt, every single one. I took the notebook seriously after that. Over the next few weeks, I learned the routine. Tic-Tac would always warn me when someone was coming. 3 taps meant a car, 2 meant someone on foot. Old Sarge turned out to be this massive German shepherd that would sometimes appear inside the store. Not everyone could see him. I figured that out when a trucker came in for coffee while old Sarge was lying right in the middle of the floor. The guy walked right through him, but I could see him clear as day, and he seemed to understand everything I said. I got creative about stopping people with red items from going into the forest. I'd offer trades. We had a stack of emergency supplies in the back. Once I swapped a guy's red sleeping bag for a better quality blue one, claiming it was a promotion. Another time I strategically spilled coffee on a woman's red scarf, then gave her a free green one as an apology. There was this family that stopped by, planning to camp near Red Rock. Their little girl had bright red shoes. I was struggling to figure out what to do when Tic-Tac swooped down and dropped a dead mouse right on those shoes. The mom was so grossed out, she made the girl change into her spare sneakers, blue ones, before they continued their trip. The weirdest part was that nothing ever happened when people wore red during the day. But according to Milton, once the sun set, red became like a beacon for the Watcher. I never questioned Milton about any of this. Somehow, I just couldn't bring myself to. During our brief overlaps at shift change, he'd just ask, "Any incidents?" I'd report whatever happened, he'd nod, and that was it. Until the night everything went to hell. It started normally enough. Milton left at 10. Tic-Tac was at his usual spot. The store was empty. Around midnight, I noticed the sky outside looked wrong. Instead of the usual black, it had this deep purple tinge. The notebook had a whole section on purple skies. Code purple. I was supposed to call Milton immediately, but his phone went straight to voicemail. That had never happened before. Old Sarge appeared next to me whining. He padded to the door, then looked back at me expectantly. "I can't leave the store," I told him. The notebook was clear about that. He barked once, sharply, then ran outside and disappeared into the darkness. 20 minutes later, a minivan pulled into the lot. A family of 4, parents, a teenage boy, and a little girl about 7 years old. They came in looking exhausted. "Our campsite reservation got canceled," the dad explained. "They said something about a storm warning, but the weather's fine. You know anywhere else we can stay tonight?" I was about to direct them to a motel in town when I noticed the little girl was wearing red pajama pants under her coat. Before I could say anything, Old Sarge reappeared, barking frantically. He ran to the window, then back to me, over and over. I looked outside. The purple in the sky had deepened. And beyond the gas station's lights, at the edge of the forest, I saw something that made my skin crawl. A tall figure in an old-fashioned suit and top hat. The hat had a red band around it. In his hand was what looked like a glowing red ball floating just above his palm. The little girl saw it too. "Look, Daddy," she said, pointing. "A magic trick." Her parents looked where she was pointing, but clearly couldn't see anything. The man in the top hat raised his other hand and beckoned to the girl. She started walking toward the door. "No!" I shouted, jumping over the counter. I grabbed a flashlight from under the register. "Everyone stay inside." The dad looked confused, then annoyed. "What's your problem, man?" I didn't have time to explain. The little girl was already opening the door. I reached her just as she stepped outside, grabbing her arm and pulling her back in. "We need to leave, now, all of you." I was trying to keep my voice calm, but failing. The mom must have seen something in my face because she grabbed her daughter's hand. "What's happening?" There's a storm coming, a bad one. You need to get to town." It was the best I could come up with. The top hat man was walking closer now, that red ball floating in front of him. Old Sarge was going nuts, barking and growling. "Take Highway 16, I said, ushering them toward their van. "Don't stop until you reach town. Don't pull over for anything or anyone." The dad started to argue, but his wife pushed him toward the driver's seat. They loaded the kids and took off, tires squealing. As soon as they were gone, the top hat man vanished, just blinked out of existence, but the red ball remained, hovering at the edge of the forest. Then I heard it, a low, gurgling sound coming from the trees. Not animal, not human, something else. Old Sarge barked once, then took off into the forest. Everything in Milton's notebook told me to lock myself in the storage room now. This was a code black, but Old Sarge had gone into those woods, and somehow I couldn't just hide. I grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight we kept for emergencies, locked the store, and followed. The forest was pitch black, except for my flashlight beam. I could hear Old Sarge barking somewhere ahead. The air felt thick, hard to breathe. That purple tint in the sky filtered down through the trees, casting everything in an eerie light. I followed the sound of barking for what felt like miles, but was probably only a few hundred yards. Then I heard a human voice shouting for help. I broke into a run, branches slapping my face. I emerged into a small clearing and froze. A hiker was backed up against a tree, his face a mask of terror. Old Sarge stood in front of him, hackles raised, and looming over them both was something. I still don't know how to describe it. It was tall, maybe 20 feet, but almost transparent, like heat rising from pavement. It shifted constantly, never quite holding one shape. The only solid parts were dozens of thin, branch-like limbs extending from its center and what looked like hundreds of tiny red lights scattered throughout its body. Eyes, maybe. The hiker saw me. "Help, please," he screamed. The thing turned toward me. Those red lights all focused in my direction. I don't know what made me do it, but I raised my flashlight and clicked it to the brightest setting, aiming it directly at the creature. It made that gurgling sound again, louder this time, and seemed to recoil from the light. I walked forward, keeping the beam steady on it. "Get behind me," I shouted to the hiker. He scrambled over, practically crawling. "What the fuck is that thing?" he gasped. "Just keep moving," I said, backing us slowly out of the clearing, the light never leaving the creature. It followed, those limbs reaching toward us, but it wouldn't come fully into the flashlight beam. We backed up all the way to the gas station, that thing keeping pace just beyond the reach of my light. When we hit the parking lot, it stopped at the tree line. The red lights blinked once, twice, and then it was gone. The hiker, his name was Samuel, was in shock. He kept saying he'd been setting up camp when his red headlamp fell off. When he bent to pick it up, he felt something watching him. Then old Sarge appeared, barking and herding him away from his campsite. The thing followed. I gave him coffee and called him a taxi to town. I didn't know what else to do. By morning, the sky was normal again. Milton showed up at 6 a.m., but it wasn't for shift change. He'd had a mild heart attack the previous night and had been in the hospital. That's why he hadn't answered when I called. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, then sighed deeply. "You did good, Cooper," he said finally. "Real good." "What is it?" I asked. "That thing in the forest?" He shook his head. "There are places in this world where the boundaries are thin. Red Rock Canyon is one of them. Some things can sense when someone's vulnerable, when they're marked." He gestured to his red notebook. "That's why we're here, to keep watch." "We? Been doing this job 40 years, he said. "Getting too old now, need someone to take over." I knew what he was asking. I should have quit right then. Anyone sane would have. But I didn't. For 3 more months I kept working that night shift, kept warning people away from the forest, kept trading away red items. I even started my own notebook. Then came the night when Tic Tac didn't show up. The night when old Sarge howled in a way I'd never heard before. The night when the sky turned not purple, but blood red. I can't talk about what happened yet. Maybe I never will. All I know is I grabbed my stuff, left the keys on the counter, and drove straight out of town. Haven't been back since, but sometimes, when I'm trying to sleep, I see those tiny red lights blinking in the darkness. And sometimes, just as I'm drifting off, I hear 3 soft taps on my window. Tick, tack, tick. I never thought I'd be writing this down, but I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone out here has experienced something similar and can help me make sense of it all. I've been a Forest Service ranger in the Tennessee Appalachian region for almost 7 years now, and what I've seen in these mountains has changed me forever. My name's James. I moved here from Kentucky to escape my family situation. Let's just say my dad wasn't winning any Father of the Year awards, and my brothers followed in his footsteps. I thought the isolation would be good for me. Just me and my old Labrador, Barclay, in a single-wide trailer on the edge of the national forest. The mountains have a way of healing you, or at least I thought they did. 3 weeks ago, My nephew Riker came to visit. He'd just graduated college and wanted to hike a section of the Appalachian Trail before settling into some corporate job. I hadn't seen him since he was 14. He's my sister's kid, and she got out of Kentucky before I did. Smart woman. The night before Riker arrived, I had an experience that still makes my skin crawl. I'd fallen asleep on the couch watching reruns of some fishing show. Barclay was snoring at my feet when I woke up around 3 a.m. to get some water. As I shuffled toward the kitchen, I glanced at the window above my sink. The curtain was open, a mistake I never make anymore. 2 glowing red eyes were staring at me through the glass. They weren't just any eyes. They were huge, about the size of golf balls, and they had this dull red glow that didn't reflect light like an animal's eyes should. Worst of all, they were about 7 feet off the ground. As I froze, they slowly rose higher, like whatever they belonged to was standing up from a crouch. They must have been 9 feet high when I finally broke from my paralysis and lunged for the curtain. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the fabric. Barclay was going nuts, barking and growling at the window. When I finally managed to yank the curtain closed, I swear I heard something scrape against the glass, like long nails or claws. I didn't sleep the rest of the night, just sat with my back against the wall, shotgun across my lap, while Barclay paced and whined. When Riker arrived the next day, I was a mess. Dark circles under my eyes, jumpy at every sound. But I tried to play it cool. He didn't need to know what I'd seen, at least not right away. "Uncle James, man, this place is beautiful," he said, climbing out of his beat-up Honda. He looked good, tall and strong with his mom's eyes. Nothing like the gangly teenager I remembered. I gave him the tour of my little trailer, showed him where he'd be sleeping on the fold-out couch, introduced him to Barclay, who immediately fell in love with him. Then I told him the first rule. Always, and I mean always, close the curtains before dark. Every window, every night. No exceptions. He laughed, thinking I was being paranoid about privacy in the woods. "There's nobody out here to see in, Uncle James." "Just promise me," I said, and something in my voice must have convinced him because he nodded, suddenly serious. I didn't tell him about Dan Williams then. Dan was another ranger who worked the eastern sector. We weren't close friends, but we'd grab beers sometimes after shifts. 3 months ago, they found him in his cabin. The official report said heart attack, but I saw his body before they zipped up the bag. His face was frozen in an expression of absolute terror, eyes bulging, mouth stretched open so wide the corners had torn. The windows in his bedroom were uncovered. The next morning, I woke up early to make breakfast before our hike. I was frying bacon when Riker came stumbling out of the living room. "Your dog was scratching at the glass door," he yawned. "I was going to let him in, but he's right there." He pointed at Barclay, who was curled up in his bed in the corner of the kitchen. The bacon sizzling in the pan suddenly smelled rotten. "What did you see exactly?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just Barclay, or what looked like Barclay, standing on his hind legs, scratching at the door." I figured he wanted in. I turned off the stove and sat Riker down. It was time to tell him some things about these mountains. "That wasn't Barclay," I said. "We call them mimics. They can look like pets, sometimes even people you know. They want you to open the door, let them in. Never, ever do that." Riker stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "You're joking, right? Some kind of local legend to scare the tourists?" I wish I was. Look, these mountains are ancient. They were old when the first people came here. There are things in these woods that don't have names, things science can't explain. He didn't believe me, not then. But he would. We set out for our hike around 10 a.m. It was early May, perfect weather, the mountains exploding with spring colors. The trail I chose wasn't part of the official AT, but a less traveled path that followed an old logging road before cutting up into the hills. I wanted to show Riker the view from Black Rock Ridge. About 2 hours in, we stopped by a small stream to refill our water bottles. That's when I noticed how quiet it had gotten. No birds, no insects, just the gurgle of the stream and the whisper of wind through the trees. "Riker," I said softly, "we need to move. Now." "What?" "We just stopped. When the woods go silent, you move. Don't run, just walk quickly and quietly." He must have seen something in my face because he didn't argue. We gathered our things and started moving at a brisk pace. After about 10 minutes, the normal sounds of the forest gradually returned. Chickadees calling, woodpeckers drumming, the buzz of spring insects. "What was that about?" Riker asked when I finally slowed down. When everything goes quiet, it means something is passing through, something the forest fears. "Like what? A bear?" I shook my head. Bears are part of the forest. They don't silence it. We hiked in silence for another hour before coming to an old fire road that would take us up to the ridge. That's when we saw it, what looked like an ancient telephone pole standing at a crossroads in the trail. It was covered in vines and moss, looking like it had been there for decades. I froze in my tracks. "That's not supposed to be there," I whispered. "It's just an old pole," Riker said, already walking toward it. "Stop!" I grabbed his arm. "Don't get any closer." As if triggered by my shout, a sound started coming from the pole. It was like an old emergency siren warming up, but distorted, almost musical. It rose and fell in a pattern that made my teeth ache and my stomach twist. "What the hell is that?" Riker whispered, his face pale. The sound was changing, becoming almost like a woman's voice, calling wordlessly. I felt an inexplicable urge to walk toward it, to touch the pole, to press my ear against the weathered wood. "Don't listen to it," I hissed, digging in my pack with shaking hands. I pulled out my portable radio and cranked the volume as high as it would go, tuning it to static. The harsh electronic noise broke whatever spell was being cast. That's when the pole moved. The base pulled free from the ground with a wet, sucking sound. What I'd thought were roots were actually jointed appendages, like the legs of some monstrous insect. The pole tilted toward us, the siren sound changing to something hungry and urgent. "Run!" I shoved Riker toward a dense thicket of rhododendron. We crashed through the undergrowth, branches whipping our faces. Behind us, I could hear it moving, a heavy thudding punctuated by that awful siren sound. We ran until my lungs felt like they were going to burst. Finally, we reached a small rock outcropping and wedged ourselves into a crevice. The noise grew louder, then slowly faded as the thing moved past our hiding spot. We stayed there for almost an hour, barely breathing. When we finally emerged, Riker was shaking. "What the fuck was that?" he gasped. "Locals call it the siren pole. It mimics sounds to draw you close. Then it—" I trailed off. "Then it what?" "Takes your voice, your screams, adds them to its collection." Riker looked like he might throw up. "Jesus Christ, Uncle James, why would you bring me out here if you knew about these things?" "The trail we plan to take doesn't usually have one. They move around, but rarely come this far west." I checked my GPS. "We need to change course. There's a ranger station about 3 miles south of here. We can rest there." As we hiked, I told Riker more of the rules. Never answer if you hear someone calling your name in the woods, especially if it sounds like someone you know. Stay away from the 6-legged cat-like creature with golden eyes that can hypnotize you if you look directly at it. The old-timers call it the wampus cat. Never whistle at night. It attracts tall, humanoid things that move with impossible speed and make screeching sounds no human throat could produce. How do you live here knowing all this? Riker asked as we approached the ranger station. The mountains give as much as they take, I said. There are good things too. If you ever get lost and find a cottage that wasn't there before, with blue smoke coming from the chimney, it's okay to go in. The old woman inside will feed you and point you home, and the ghost of a woman with silver glasses sometimes appears to hikers in trouble. She's helped guide lost children back to trails. We reached the ranger station by late afternoon. It was just a simple cabin with a radio, some emergency supplies, and 2 cots. After the day's events, neither of us wanted to hike back to my trailer in the dark, so we decided to stay the night. As the sun set, I made sure every window was covered. Riker didn't question it this time. We heated up some canned stew on the propane stove and ate in silence. I could see Riker processing everything, trying to make sense of a world that suddenly didn't follow the rules he'd always known. "Why did you stay?" he finally asked. "After you learned about all this?" I took a long time to answer. These mountains got into my blood. For all their dangers, there's a peace here I never found anywhere else, and someone needs to know the rules to help others stay safe. That night, as we tried to sleep, the wind picked up. It moaned around the eaves of the cabin, sometimes sounding almost like words. Around midnight, it changed. Through the wind came the unmistakable sound of someone calling my name. "James. James Wilson." Riker sat up on his cot. "Uncle James, is someone out there?" "Don't listen to it," I said. "No matter what, don't answer it and don't open the door." The voice became more insistent. "James, please help me. I'm hurt." It was using my mother's voice now, though she'd been dead for 15 years. "James, honey, please let me in. It's so cold out here." Riker was shaking. "It sounds just like, I know, it pulls the voices from your mind. Whatever you hear, it's not real." The pleading continued for hours, cycling through voices we knew, becoming increasingly desperate. Around 3 a.m., it finally stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse than the voices. Just before dawn, as the first gray light seeped around the edges of the curtains, something heavy bumped against the cabin wall. Then again, and again, like something was circling the building, testing for weaknesses. I clutched my shotgun, though I knew from experience it would do little good against whatever was out there. Riker had my hunting knife, knuckles white around the handle. The bumping stopped at the door. The handle jiggled. Then came a sound that will haunt me forever. The sliding, scratching noise of something writing on the wooden door. When the sun finally rose fully and the forest sounds returned to normal, I cautiously approached the door. Carved into the wood were symbols I'd never seen before, curved lines and sharp angles that hurt my eyes to look at them. Riker took photos, though I warned him not to share them online. Some things attract attention you don't want. We hiked back to my trailer in tense silence, taking a different route than before. Riker was quiet for the rest of his visit, which lasted only 2 more days instead of the planned week. I thought he'd rush back to civilization, try to forget everything he'd seen. Instead, he called me 3 months later to say he'd taken a job with a conservation nonprofit in Knoxville. He's living in a small cabin about 30 miles from me now. The mountains called to him despite everything, or maybe because of everything. Last week he came over for dinner. As we sat on my porch watching the sunset, Barkley snoring between our chairs, Riker asked, "Do you ever regret telling me the truth about this place?" I thought about it, watching the shadows lengthen across the valley. No, knowledge keeps you alive out here. I saw something last night, he said quietly. Red eyes outside my bedroom window. They rose up slowly, like whatever it was stood from a crouch. My blood ran cold. Were your curtains closed? Yes, thanks to you. I nodded, relieved, but still worried. They're getting bolder. What are they, Uncle James? What do they want? I don't know. No one does. They've been here longer than us, and they'll be here after we're gone. That night, after Riker left, I double-checked all my curtains and locked every door and window. As I was getting ready for bed, Barkley started growling at the front door. Through the curtain, I could see a shadow that looked human-shaped but too tall, too thin. I quickly turned off all the lights and sat in the dark, gun in my lap, until it moved away. I haven't slept well since. I keep checking the windows, making sure nothing can see in. But I always have the feeling that something is watching, waiting for me to make a mistake. I love these mountains. They're my home now. But some nights, when the wind howls and shadows move where they shouldn't, I wonder if they'll eventually be the death of me. If one night I'll forget to close a curtain, and those red eyes will be the last thing I ever see. I've been in the airport business for almost 10 years now. Started at O'Hare in Chicago, then moved to Minneapolis, St. Paul. Big airports, the kind where you're always dealing with someone's shit. Delayed flights, lost luggage, crying kids. But what really made me quit was the passengers. They've gotten worse every year. More entitled, more violent. 2 months ago, a guy threw hot coffee in my face because his flight was delayed due to weather. A week later, some lady slapped me because we wouldn't let her bring her emotional support python on board. I was done. Completely burned out. So when I saw a job listing for a night shift supervisor at a small regional airport called One Pine, with nearly double my current salary, I applied immediately. The interview was weird from the start. The manager, James, was a tall guy with a permanent half smile. He barely looked at my resume. Just asked if I had airport experience, if I was comfortable working alone, and if I could follow written instructions exactly. Then he hired me on the spot, said I could start the following Monday. Just one thing, he said, handing me a sealed envelope. Inside are the rules for the night shift. Read them when you get there. Follow them precisely, no exceptions. I should have asked more questions, but honestly, I was just happy to get away from the constant stream of angry travelers. And the pay was too good to pass up. One Pine Airport is about an hour from the nearest town, surrounded by dense forest. It's a single terminal building with 6 gates, though only 3 are ever used. During the day, there are maybe 8 flights total. At night, there are none. My first night, I arrived at 8 p.m. The day shift was just finishing up, and James was waiting for me at the security checkpoint. "Welcome to the night shift," he said, handing me a set of keys. "The envelope I gave you contains the rules. Read them as soon as you're alone. Don't open it before then." He gave me a quick tour. The place was practically empty. Just a small coffee shop, closed for the night, a newsstand, and the gates. No restaurants, no fancy shops. The control tower was automated at night. James explained that my job was basically to keep an eye on things until 6 a.m. when the morning staff arrived. "What exactly am I watching for?" I asked. "Just follow the rules," he said, heading for the exit. "I'll see you in the morning." Once he left, I was completely alone. The silence was almost shocking after years of constant airport noise. I went to the supervisor's office, a small room with security monitors, a desk, and a coffee maker, and opened the envelope. Inside was a laminated sheet with 6 rules printed on it. 1. Between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m., a woman named Elizabeth may enter the terminal. She will be dressed in vintage clothing and carrying 2 large leather suitcases. Do not speak to her unless she asks you your name. If she asks any other questions, ignore her completely. 2. At approximately 1:30 a.m., a janitor named Simon will arrive. Ask him his name. If he responds with Simon, allow him to continue his work. If he gives any other name, use the red phone in the office to call extension E. 3. If you hear announcements over the PA system between midnight and 5 a.m., ignore them. The system should be off during these hours. 4. If a small aircraft appears on runway 2 without landing, look at it once, then look away. Do not look at it twice. 5. If you break Rule 4 and look twice, do not look a third time. Immediately go to the office and close the blinds. 6. If anyone claiming to be TSA, police, or any other authority arrives between midnight and 5 a.m. and asks for access to the sky bridge, refuse regardless of their credentials or threats. If they persist, go to the men's restroom in Terminal B and lock yourself in the last stall until you hear Simon say, "She's gone now." I read the rules 3 times, convinced it was some kind of joke. Maybe a prank they played on new employees. But something about the official lamination and the serious way James had handed it to me made my stomach twist. The first few hours were uneventful. I made coffee, checked the security cameras, and walked around the empty terminal. The silence was actually nice after years of constant noise. At exactly 11:07 p.m., the main entrance doors slid open. A woman walked in carrying 2 large leather suitcases. She was maybe in her mid-20s, wearing a navy blue dress and jacket that looked like something from the 1950s. Her hair was styled in perfect waves, and she wore bright red lipstick. She was strikingly beautiful, but something felt off about her. The suitcases looked heavy, too heavy for someone her size to carry so effortlessly. My heart started racing as I remembered the first rule. Elizabeth. This had to be Elizabeth. She walked to the center of the terminal and set down her suitcases. Then she looked directly at me and smiled. "Quiet night, isn't it?" she said. I remembered the rule. Don't speak unless she asks your name. I nodded slightly and continued checking the departure screens, which displayed nothing since there were no flights. She walked closer. "Not much of a talker, are you?" "That's okay. It gets lonely here at night. I'm just waiting for my flight." I said nothing, though it took every ounce of willpower. Every instinct was telling me to be polite, to respond. "Do you know when the next flight to Chicago is?" she asked, still smiling. I ignored her, pretending to be busy with some paperwork. My hands were shaking. "I asked you a question," she said, her voice still friendly but with an edge to it now. "It's rude to ignore people." I kept my eyes down, counting my heartbeats, reminding myself of the rules. For the next hour and a half, Elizabeth wandered the terminal. Sometimes she'd try to talk to me. Sometimes she'd just sit with her suitcases. Once she went to the water fountain and took a drink, but I noticed no water actually came out, though she went through all the motions. At 1:27 a.m., a janitor pushed his cart through the side entrance. He was an older man with gray hair and tired eyes. I approached him immediately. "What's your name?" I asked. He looked at me for a moment, then said, "Simon. You must be the new night supervisor." Relief washed over me. "Yes, I am." "Don't mind Elizabeth," he said quietly, nodding toward where she sat near Gate 3. "She's mostly harmless if you follow the rules." "So this isn't a joke," I whispered. Simon's face turned serious. "No joke. This place is different at night. Has been since they built it on the old burial grounds back in '63. Just follow the rules and you'll be fine." He began mopping the floor near the restrooms, and I returned to my rounds. Elizabeth was still sitting by gate 3 watching me. I avoided looking directly at her. At 2:15 a.m., I was checking the security cameras when I noticed something on the monitor showing runway 2. A small plane had appeared, a black and red Cessna Skyhawk. I hadn't heard it land. It was just there. Rule 4. Look once, then look away. I glanced at the screen, then immediately switched to another camera view. My heart was pounding. I wanted desperately to look again to confirm what I'd seen. It took everything I had to resist. But as I was cycling through the other cameras, I accidentally clicked back to runway 2. The plane was still there, but now someone was standing beside it. A dark figure, too distant to make out clearly. I quickly changed the camera again, cursing myself. I'd looked twice. Rule 5 said to go to the office and close the blinds if that happened. I hurried to the small supervisor's office and pulled down the cheap plastic blinds. For the next 20 minutes, I sat in the office, trying to calm down. This had to be some elaborate hazing ritual. Maybe there were hidden cameras. Maybe James and the others were watching me right now, laughing. The office phone rang, making me jump. I hesitated, then picked up. "Hello?" There was no answer, just static and what sounded like distant whispering. I hung up and decided to check the terminal again. As I stepped out of the office, I saw Elizabeth standing about 20 feet away, staring at me. Her suitcases were at her feet. "Why won't you talk to me?" she asked. "I've been waiting so long." I didn't respond, remembering the rule. "I know you can hear me," she said, taking a step closer. "I just want someone to talk to." I turned away, pretending to check the departure board. "What's your name?" She finally asked. According to the rules, this was the only question I could answer. "Mark," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Mark," she repeated, smiling. "It's nice to meet you, Mark. I'm Elizabeth." I nodded but said nothing more. "My flight's been delayed," she continued. "It's been delayed for so long. Will you help me find my gate?" "Don't speak. Don't speak. Don't speak." She took another step closer. "Please, Mark, I'm so tired of waiting." I shook my head and started walking toward the security checkpoint, trying to put some distance between us. That's when I saw it through the large terminal windows. The figure from the runway was now at the edge of the tarmac, closer to the building. In the dim light, I could see it was tall and thin, almost unnaturally so, wearing what looked like a pilot's uniform. I quickly looked away, remembering Rule 5. Don't look a third time. "He's coming for me," Elizabeth said, suddenly right behind me. I jumped, startled by her proximity. Without thinking, I blurted out, "Who's coming?" The moment the words left my mouth, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. I'd spoken to her without her asking my name. Elizabeth's face changed. Her pleasant smile twisted into something terrible. Blood began pouring from her eyes and nose, running down her face and staining her pristine blue dress. "You spoke to me," she shrieked, her voice no longer human. "You spoke to me." She grabbed one of her suitcases and lifted it effortlessly, hurling it toward me with impossible strength. I ducked, and it crashed into the wall behind me, cracking the plaster. The suitcase broke open, and instead of clothes or personal items, hundreds of teeth, human teeth, spilled across the floor. I ran. Elizabeth was right behind me, screaming inhuman sounds. I remembered Rule 6, the men's restroom in Terminal B. I sprinted through the connecting corridor, hearing her gaining on me. The lights began to flicker, and the temperature dropped dramatically. I could see my breath. I burst into the men's restroom and locked myself in the last stall, my hands shaking so badly I could barely slide the bolt. Almost immediately, Elizabeth began pounding on the restroom door. "Mark, let me in, Mark. I just want to talk." The pounding became more violent. The entire restroom shook. I heard the main door splinter, and then her footsteps on the tile floor. "I can smell you, Mark," she said, her voice almost a purr now. "I've been waiting so long for someone to talk to." I pressed myself against the back of the stall, trying not to make a sound. The lights flickered again, then went out completely. In the darkness, I heard her moving from stall to stall, checking each one. "This airport isn't what you think it is," she said. "It never was. Do you know how many people have disappeared here? How many souls are trapped?" She slammed open the stall next to mine. "Just one more to go. Your friend James knows. He feeds us, one night supervisor at a time." I closed my eyes, certain I was about to die. Then I heard another voice, Simon's. "Elizabeth," he said firmly, "it's time to go. Your flight is ready." She hissed, an actual hiss, like a snake. "He spoke to me, Simon. He's mine now." "No," Simon replied. "Those aren't the rules, and you know it. He's protected until sunrise unless he breaks all 6 rules. He's only broken 1. Elizabeth screamed in frustration, a sound so piercing I had to cover my ears. There was a loud crash, then silence. After what felt like hours, I heard Simon's voice again, closer now, right outside my stall. "She's gone now." I waited a moment, then slowly unlocked the stall door. Simon stood there, holding his mop like a staff. The restroom was destroyed, mirrors shattered, sinks torn from the wall, stall doors ripped off their hinges. But my stall was untouched. "You broke a rule," he said, not unkindly, "but you followed the most important one. Never let anyone into the sky bridge at night. That's where they're trying to get to." "Who's trying to get to it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "The ones who didn't make their flights," he said cryptically. "Come on. You should be in the office until sunrise." We walked back to the terminal in silence. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see Elizabeth or the figure from the runway, but the airport seemed empty again. As we passed Gate 3, I noticed Elizabeth's second suitcase still sitting there. "Shouldn't we move that?" I asked. Simon shook his head. "Don't touch anything she leaves behind. Ever." Back in the office, Simon made coffee while I sat trembling in the desk chair. "Has it always been like this?" I asked. "Since before my time," he said. "I've been the night janitor for 37 years. Seen a lot of supervisors come and go." "What happens to them?" He shrugged. "Some quit after the first night. Some last a few months. The ones who stay too long, they change, start to become like her." At 3:42 a.m., the radio in the office suddenly crackled to life. A voice that sounded like it was coming through layers of static said, "Terminal B, Gate 4, final boarding call for Flight 537 to Chicago." Simon quickly turned it off. "Rule 3, he reminded me. Ignore all announcements between midnight and 5 a.m. At 4:15 a.m., there was a commotion at the main entrance. 3 men in tactical gear burst in, carrying what looked like real assault rifles. They wore vests with TSA printed on them. "Airport security," one of them shouted. "We need immediate access to the sky bridge for an emergency inspection." Simon grabbed my arm. "Rule 6, he whispered, "no matter what." I stood up, trying to appear authoritative despite my fear. "I'm sorry, but I can't allow that. The sky bridge is closed for maintenance." The lead agent stepped forward. "This is a matter of national security. Step aside." "I can't do that," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "You'll have to come back during regular hours." The agent raised his weapon. "This is your final warning. Grant us access or face the consequences." Simon squeezed my arm, reminding me of the rest of Rule 6. "I'm sorry, but no," I said, then turned and ran toward Terminal B. I heard shouting behind me, then what sounded like gunshots. Something hit me in the back, and I felt a searing pain as I collapsed onto the floor. But I kept crawling, desperate to reach the restroom. More gunshots, more pain. But somehow I made it, dragging myself into the last stall and locking it with bloody fingers. As I sat there, bleeding and certain I was dying, I heard them enter the restroom. Heavy boots on tile. "Check every stall," a voice ordered. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end. Then everything went quiet. The pain disappeared. I opened my eyes and found myself sitting on the toilet completely unharmed. No blood, no bullet wounds. The restroom was intact, no sign of the destruction from earlier. I checked my watch, 6:00 a.m. exactly. Sunrise. When I walked back to the main terminal, James was there, smiling his half-smile. "First night went okay?" he asked casually. "What the hell is this place?" I demanded. He nodded, as if he'd been expecting this question. One Pine Airport was built on special ground that thins the veil between worlds. During the day, it's just an airport. At night, it's something else. "Those rules are for your protection," he finished. "And they work, as you've discovered." He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "Your hazard pay. We add a bonus for each night you survive." Inside the envelope were 10 crisp $100 bills. "This is insane," I said. "You can't just—" "You're free to quit," he interrupted. "Most do after the first night. But consider your options. Go back to a regular airport, dealing with violent passengers for half the pay, or stay here, follow some simple rules, and make more money than you ever have." I wanted to tell him to go to hell. I wanted to run from this place and never look back. But as I stood there, weighing my options, I realized something disturbing. The thought of dealing with regular passengers again, the entitled, angry people who had driven me to quit in the first place, seemed almost as terrifying as Elizabeth and her suitcase of teeth. "I need to think about it," I said finally. James nodded. "Take the day. Call me tonight if you want to come back for a second shift." That was 8 hours ago. I've been sitting in my motel room since then, trying to make sense of what happened, trying to decide what to do. The envelope with the money is on the nightstand, more than I made in a week at my old job. My phone says it's 5:30 p.m. now. The sun will set in an hour. James will be expecting my call soon. I know what any sane person would do. Run, report this to someone, never go back. But who would believe me? And what if the things at One Pine followed me? What if Elizabeth found me somewhere else, somewhere without rules to protect me? Maybe the rules are the only thing keeping the horror contained. Maybe that's why they need someone there each night. I think I'm going to call James. I think I'm going back tonight. At least at One Pine, I know what the monsters look like. I've been a real estate agent in Millbrook City for almost 12 years now. I've seen my fair share of weird properties, houses with hidden rooms, basements that flood with mysterious black water, even places where every previous owner died under strange circumstances. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, compares to what happened to me last Thursday at Starlight Estates. For those who don't know, Starlight Estates was supposed to be this fancy development project about 15 miles outside Millbrook. The developer went bankrupt halfway through construction around 2017, and what's left is this half-finished neighborhood that looks like someone tried to build a modern art exhibit in the middle of nowhere. White houses with jet black trim, all arranged at these weird angles that make no sense when you're actually walking through them, like someone deliberately wanted to disorient you. My boss Mark assigned me house number 8, which had been sitting unsold for 7 years. 7 years. In today's market, that's practically unheard of. Even the crappiest properties move within a year if they're priced right. When I asked why it hadn't sold, Mark just shrugged and said something about picky buyers and weird vibes. He offered me double commission if I could unload it, which should have been my first red flag. I pulled up to Starlight Estates around 9:30 a.m. The GPS took me down this narrow road that winds through dense woods before suddenly opening up to reveal the development. My first thought was how much the houses looked like decayed teeth, stark white with black trim, some of them half-finished with construction materials still piled nearby. According to the listing, 8 of the 15 constructed homes were supposedly occupied, but I didn't see a single car, person, or even curtain movement as I drove through. House number 8 was at the end of a cul-de-sac, backing up to more woods. It looked identical to the others, modern, angular, with huge windows and that same white-black color scheme. I parked in the driveway and sat there for a minute, just taking it in. Something felt wrong. The silence was absolute. No birds, no distant traffic, not even wind in the trees, just complete stillness. I grabbed my laptop bag and lockbox key and headed up to the front door. The sidewalk had this weird optical illusion where it seemed to slope downward even though it was perfectly level. I kept feeling like I was going to trip. The front door was solid black with a weird symbol etched into it, not satanic or anything, just a geometric pattern that seemed to shift when you looked at it too long. Inside, the house was immaculate, but felt like it had never been lived in. Everything was monochromatic, black floors, white walls, gray furniture. The staging was minimal and weirdly formal, like a showroom designed by someone who'd only seen houses in magazines. The living room opened to a kitchen with black countertops and white cabinets. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out onto a backyard that was just empty dirt leading to the tree line. I set up my laptop at the kitchen island and made some coffee using the supplies I'd brought. I never trust coffee makers in vacant houses. The whole time I was waiting for the water to boil, I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but of course no one was there. The floorboards above me creaked. I froze, coffee mug halfway to my lips. The sound was distinct, like someone taking a single step and then stopping. I called out, "Hello, anyone here?" My voice sounded flat, like the air was too dense for sound to travel properly. Nothing, just that unnatural silence again. I convinced myself it was just the house settling, but my hands were shaking as I opened the property details on my laptop. According to the notes, house number 8 had been shown 47 times in 7 years, with 0 offers. Mark's notes mentioned that most viewings ended abruptly, with potential buyers leaving without explanation. One couple apparently made it all the way to signing paperwork before backing out, claiming their child had seen someone with no face upstairs. While reading through this unsettling history, I heard a soft scraping sound from the front hallway. I turned to see a folded piece of paper sliding under the front door. My heart nearly stopped. Someone had just slipped a note under the door, but I hadn't heard footsteps approaching or leaving. I stood frozen for a good 30 seconds before working up the courage to retrieve it. The paper was yellowed and felt oddly textured, like old parchment. Written in shaky handwriting were what looked like rules. 1. Don't lock any doors from the inside. 2. Keep the TV on even if you don't understand what's being shown. 3. If someone appears on the stairs, stand your ground. 4. Avoid mirrors, photographs, and glass after 3 p.m. 5. If a man in red approaches, don't turn your back. I thought it was some stupid prank from local teenagers, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The coffee suddenly tasted bitter and wrong. I checked my phone. No signal, of course. The house had Wi-Fi according to the listing notes, so I connected to that instead, relieved when it actually worked. I remembered the house had a security system, so I accessed it through my laptop. There were cameras covering the front door, backyard, and driveway. I rewound the front door footage, expecting to see some kid playing a prank. Instead, what I saw made my blood run cold. A man with gray hair was standing at the door, his back to the camera. He moved wrong, like he was walking backwards but facing forward at the same time. He slid the paper under the door and then just vanished between frames. 1 second there, the next gone. I slammed my laptop shut and grabbed my keys. Prank or not, I was done with this place. I rushed to the front door and turned the knob, but it wouldn't budge. Locked. I tried the deadbolt, but it too was immovable. I remembered my phone and tried calling Mark, but the call wouldn't go through despite showing full Wi-Fi bars. The TV in the living room turned on by itself. It was showing static, but within the static I could make out shapes moving. I remembered rule number 2 and left it on, backing away slowly. My next thought was to try the back door. As I moved through the kitchen toward the rear of the house, I glanced out the window into the backyard. A man was standing there, his back to me. He wore a bright red satin shirt that seemed to shimmer unnaturally. He was completely motionless except for a subtle swaying, like he was standing in a breeze I couldn't feel. I ducked down below the window, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. When I dared to look again, he was closer to the house, still facing away, still swaying. His movements weren't right, like watching a video played at the wrong speed. I remembered rule number 5, don't turn your back. But he wasn't approaching me directly, just standing there. I backed away from the window and decided to try the garage instead. As I turned toward the interior door that led to the garage, I heard footsteps upstairs again, slow, deliberate steps moving from one end of the hallway to the other. The garage door was locked too, the knob refusing to turn despite not having any visible lock. I was trapped. My phone buzzed with a message, which was impossible since calls weren't going through. It was from a number I recognized. Andrew, a former colleague who'd quit suddenly about 6 months ago. The message read, "Follow the rules. I left them for you." I texted back, "Andrew, what the fuck is going on? Did you leave that note?" 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then, "Yes, you need to follow them exactly. House Create takes people. It's taken me too." "What do you mean, taken? Where are you?" "Closer than you think. There's something here with us. It wants another one." "Another what?" "Andrew, call the police." "Can't. No one can help now. It's almost 3. Remember rule number 4. I checked the time. 2:57 p.m. Rule number 4. Avoid mirrors, photographs, and glass after 3 p.m. I quickly moved away from the windows and turned all the framed real estate certificates on the walls to face the wall. As I did this, I noticed my reflection in one of them. Except my reflection wasn't moving with me. It was just standing there, head tilted slightly. I ran upstairs, away from all the glass and mirrors on the main floor. The upper hallway had 4 doors, presumably 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. All were closed except one at the end, which was cracked open slightly. As I reached the top of the stairs, I heard something moving behind the partially open door. My phone buzzed again. Rule number 3. If someone appears on the stairs, stand your ground. As if on cue, I heard footsteps on the stairs behind me. slow, dragging footsteps. I wanted to run, to hide in one of the rooms, but Andrew's warning kept me frozen in place. I turned slowly to face whatever was coming up the stairs. It was the man in the red shirt. He was climbing the stairs backwards, his feet moving unnaturally, his back still turned to me. His head was bent at an impossible angle, like it had been broken and reset wrong. Gray hair hung limply, partially obscuring what I assumed was his face, though I couldn't see it from my position. My every instinct screamed to run, but I remembered the rule: stand your ground. I planted my feet and watched as this thing ascended the stairs. When it reached the step just below where I stood, it stopped. We both remained motionless for what felt like an eternity. Then my phone buzzed again. Use your camera as a mirror. Show it to itself. With trembling hands, I opened my phone's camera app and pointed it at the figure, using the screen to see what was in front of me without looking directly. What I saw nearly made me drop the phone. Through the camera, I could see what should have been the man's face, but it wasn't a face at all. It was just smooth, pale skin stretched over a skull-like shape, with angry red protrusions where features should be. No eyes, no mouth, no nose, just those raw, inflamed spots trying to push through the skin. The creature jerked violently when the camera captured its non-face. It made a sound like air escaping from a punctured tire and collapsed onto the stairs, its limbs folding in ways human bones shouldn't allow. I backed away as it writhed, still watching through my phone screen. Then, between one blink and the next, it was gone. Just gone. Not even a depression in the carpet where it had been. My legs gave out, and I sat heavily on the floor, gasping for breath. My phone buzzed one final time. Get out now. Doors open. Don't come back. I practically tumbled down the stairs and rushed to the front door. It opened easily now, as if it had never been locked. I ran to my car and drove away, not looking back once. I called Mark from the highway and quit on the spot. He didn't even sound surprised, just sighed and said, "I figured as much," before hanging up. When I got home, I had an email from the county records office. I hadn't requested anything. It contained information about Starlight Estates, specifically house number 4, 2 doors down from number 8. According to the records, house number 4 had been occupied by the Cameron family until 4 years ago, when all 4 of them disappeared. Police investigation discovered something bizarre inside. Lifelike stone statues of Mrs. Cameron and the 2 children in various poses throughout the house. But Mr. Cameron was never found. I'm still trying to process what happened. I can't explain the locked doors, the figure on the stairs, or how Andrew knew what was happening. I've tried calling him dozens of times, but his number is disconnected now. The text conversation is still on my phone, though, my only proof that any of this was real. I keep thinking about what Andrew said. It wants another one. And about that thing on the stairs with its smooth, featureless face trying to grow features, like it needed a new face, a new identity. I think Mr. Cameron is still in Starlight Estates, not as himself anymore, but as something else, something that needs another one to continue whatever horrific existence it's carved out in that cursed development. I've requested a transfer to our office in another state. I never want to drive past Starlight Estates again. If you're house hunting in Millbrook City and your agent mentions a modern development with good prices, just ask for the name, and if it's Starlight, run. Just run. I still can't believe what happened to me last week. I'm writing this down, partly because I need to process it. but also as a warning to anyone who might be desperate enough to take that night shift job at the Ravenwood post office. Don't. Just don't. I'd been unemployed for almost 4 months. My savings were running out, and I was getting desperate. The job market in Ravenwood is practically non-existent. It's a small town where everyone knows everyone, and new opportunities are rare. So when I saw the ad in the local paper for a night shift postal clerk, I jumped at it. The pay was surprisingly good, $25 an hour for basically just sitting there overnight and making sure no one broke in. The interview was weird from the start. It was conducted in the back room of the post office at 5:30 p.m., just as the regular staff was leaving. The manager, who introduced himself only as Mr. Black, was a tall, thin man with pale skin who hardly made eye contact. He asked almost nothing about my qualifications or experience. Instead, he just said, "Can you follow instructions exactly as they're given?" When I said yes, he hired me on the spot and told me to come back at 9 p.m. that night for my first shift. I was desperate enough not to question it. When I arrived for my first night, the place was deserted. The front door was unlocked, but all the lights were off except for a small desk lamp at the reception counter. Next to it was an envelope with my name on it, Carl, in blocky handwriting. Inside was a typed note from Mr. Black. "Carl, welcome to your first night at Ravenwood Post Office. Your shift is from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. Please adhere to the following rules at all times. 1. Never leave the building between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. 2. Do not look directly at trick-or-treaters if they appear at the door. 3. If you use the bathroom, wait 15 minutes before returning to the main desk. 4. Thank Fergus when he delivers mail at midnight. 5. Never open any packages. 6. Do not answer the phone, even if caller ID shows it's me. 7. If I appear in person before 6 a.m., hide in the freezer immediately. Your primary duty is to ensure nothing is removed from the premises overnight. The security cameras are non-functional, so you must remain vigilant. Mr. Black." I remember laughing nervously after reading it. What kind of joke was this? Trick-or-treaters? It wasn't even October. And why would I need to hide from my own boss? I figured it was some weird hazing ritual for the new guy. The first hour passed uneventfully. I familiarized myself with the layout of the place, the main counter where customers would normally come during the day, the sorting room behind it filled with shelves and bins of mail, a small break room with a microwave and mini fridge, a bathroom, and a walk-in freezer at the back that seemed weirdly out of place in a post office. I assumed it was for temperature-sensitive mail or something. At exactly 10 p.m., the atmosphere changed. The air felt heavier, colder. The quiet hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to grow louder, more irritating. I tried turning on the radio I'd brought, but it only picked up static, with occasional whispers buried in the noise that I couldn't quite make out. At 10:23 p.m., the phone rang. I jumped. The caller ID showed Black Mr. I remembered rule number 6 and let it ring. It rang 17 times before stopping. At 10:32 p.m., it rang again. Same caller ID. This time, 23 rings before silence. At 10:47 p.m., a third call. I was tempted to answer it just to make it stop. My finger hovered over the receiver, but something in my gut told me to follow the rules. After 35 rings, it finally stopped. While exploring the mail sorting room again to keep myself awake, I noticed a drawer under one of the counters that I'd missed earlier. Inside was a worn notebook. The first page had "Property of John Glass, Night Guard" written on it. I flipped through it. Most of it was boring. John complaining about the night shift, talking about TV shows he watched to pass the time. But then I found entries that made my blood run cold. Day 23. Mr. Black's rules make more sense now. They're not jokes. I saw what happens when you break number 2. Never again. Never look at them. Day 45. Fergus came at midnight again. His eyes, they're completely black. Not just the iris, the whole eye, like looking into a void. But I always thank him. Always. The next entry was dated 2 weeks later. I broke rule number 5. I opened one of the packages. I shouldn't have. God help me, I shouldn't have. What was inside, I can't describe it. I can't. But I took some home. I've been selling it to people in town. They love it. They crave it. And they're changing. We're all changing. I think I've done something terrible to Ravenwood. That was the final entry. I closed the notebook, my hand shaking. What had John Glass done? What had he found in that package? At exactly midnight, I heard a knock at the back door. 3 precise knocks, evenly spaced. I peeked through the small window in the door. A hooded figure stood there holding a small package. His face was obscured by shadows, but I could make out his eyes, completely black, just as John had described. This had to be Fergus. I hesitated, then opened the door. Fergus said nothing, just held out the package. I took it and, remembering rule number 4, said, "Thank you, Fergus." He nodded almost imperceptibly, then turned and walked away, vanishing into the darkness beyond the post office's exterior lights. The package was small, maybe 6x6 inches, wrapped in brown paper with no address or postmark. Just a symbol drawn on top that looked like a spiral with an eye in the center. I placed it on the counter, fighting the urge to open it. Rule number 5 was very clear. Around 1:30 a.m., I heard giggling outside the front door. 3 small figures stood there, all wearing Halloween masks, a witch, a skeleton, and what looked like a clown. They appeared to be children, but something about their proportions seemed off. I remembered rule number 2. Do not look directly at trick-or-treaters if they appear at the door. I quickly averted my eyes, but not before one of them, the one in the clown mask, saw me looking. It waved, then slowly removed its mask. God, I wish I hadn't seen what was underneath. It had a face, yes, but not a human one. The skin was gray and papery, the eyes completely black like Fergus's, but worse. They seemed to pull at my consciousness, dragging it forward. Its smile was too wide, stretching literally from ear to ear, filled with needle-like teeth. I couldn't look away now. I was frozen, trapped in its gaze. The other 2 removed their masks as well, revealing similar inhuman faces. They pressed their hands against the glass door, and to my horror, I found myself walking toward it, my body moving against my will. My hand reached for the lock. I fought against it with everything I had, screaming internally, but my fingers kept moving toward the deadbolt. Just as I was about to unlock it, I remembered John's notebook. Never look at them. With a tremendous effort, I managed to close my eyes. The compulsion weakened just enough for me to regain control of my body. I turned and ran to the bathroom, slamming and locking the door behind me. I could hear them outside, scratching at the bathroom door, whispering my name in voices that sounded like gravel being crushed. "Carl! Let us in! Carl!" I sat on the toilet lid, hands over my ears, eyes squeezed shut for what felt like hours. When I finally checked my watch, only 20 minutes had passed. I remembered rule number 3, wait 15 minutes after using the bathroom before returning to the main desk. I decided to wait the full 15 minutes from when the scratching and whispering finally stopped. When I finally emerged around 2:15 a.m., the post office was silent. I cautiously made my way back to the main counter. The package Fergus had delivered was gone. In its place was a small puddle of black liquid, that seemed to move slightly, as if breathing. A trail of the same substance led toward the sorting room. I heard rustling from inside. Something was in there, moving among the shelves of mail, something that breathed in wet, gurgling gasps. I should have run. I should have gotten the hell out of there. But rule number 1 kept flashing in my mind. Never leave the building between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. I didn't know what would happen if I broke that rule, but after what I'd seen, I wasn't willing to find out. I crept closer to the sorting room door and peered inside. The blackness was moving between the shelves, formless, occasionally resembling a human silhouette before melting back into something more primal. It seemed to be searching for something, opening drawers and sifting through mail bins. I backed away quietly. Whatever it was, it had emerged from that package. It had to be what John Glass had found, what he'd been selling to the townspeople. As I retreated, my elbow knocked against a stack of mail trays. They clattered to the floor. The thing in the sorting room went still. Then it moved, fast, toward the doorway. I ran to the break room and hid behind the door, praying it wouldn't find me. I heard it enter the room, its wet breathing so close I could feel the moisture in the air. It paused, and for a moment I thought it would leave. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket, a text message. The thing whirled toward the sound, and I caught a glimpse of it from the corner of my eye. It was human-shaped but wrong, limbs too long, joints bending in impossible directions, its face just a black hole that seemed to absorb the light around it. I burst from my hiding place and ran back to the main counter. The thing followed, moving in a horrifying, spider-like scuttle across the ceiling and walls. The clock read 5:04 a.m. Just under an hour to go before 6 a.m., when I could finally leave. That's when I saw it through the front window, a tall, thin figure standing under the streetlight. Mr. Black. He raised his hand as if greeting me, then stepped into the light. His face wasn't a face anymore. His eyes were black voids, like those of the trick-or-treaters in Fergus. His mouth gaped open, impossibly wide, unhinging like a snake's jaw. He began walking toward the post office entrance, his movements jerky and unnatural, like a marionette controlled by an unskilled puppeteer. Rule number 7 flashed in my mind. If I appear in person before 6 a.m., hide in the freezer immediately. I ran for the back of the building, hearing the front door unlock behind me. I didn't look back, but I heard something entering, not walking, but a sound like dozens of limbs skittering across the floor and walls. I reached the freezer, yanked open the heavy metal door, and threw myself inside, pulling it shut behind me. The small window in the door provided the only view out into the hallway. Through it, I saw the thing that had been Mr. Black crawl past. It had transformed completely now, no longer even pretending to be human. It was a writhing mass of limbs, dozens of them, with that same black void at its center. It paused at the freezer door, and I swear it knew I was inside. One elongated limb, ending in something like a hand with too many fingers, reached for the door handle. I pressed my weight against the door, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The handle jiggled, once, twice, then stopped. The creature lingered for a moment longer, then continued down the hall, disappearing from view. I stayed in that freezer, shivering violently from both cold and terror, until my watch showed 6 a.m. exactly. I cautiously opened the door. The hallway was empty. The entire post office was silent. Daylight was filtering through the windows. I walked carefully to the front, ready to run at the first sign of movement. But the building was empty. Whatever had been there during the night was gone. I didn't wait to sign out or leave a note. I left the post office and went straight to my car. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror. Mr. Black stood at the entrance, looking completely normal. Tall, thin, pale, but human. He raised his hand in that same greeting gesture he'd made before transforming. I floored the accelerator and didn't look back again. I haven't returned to Ravenwood Post Office. I haven't even gone back to town. I'm writing this from a motel 50 miles away, trying to decide what to do next. But I keep thinking about what John Glass wrote, that he took something from a package and sold it to people in town, that they were all changing. What was in those packages? What's happening to Ravenwood, and how many other night guards came before John Glass and me? I don't have answers. All I know is I'm never going back there. And if you ever see a job listing for a night shift at a post office with strange rules, especially one in Ravenwood, run the other way. Some rules exist for a reason. I never believed in the supernatural. Ghost stories, haunted houses, that was all just fiction to me. Until 3 months ago. I'm still trying to make sense of what happened during those 3 weeks at Ms. Crownist's house. I've barely told anyone about this because I know how it sounds. But I need to get this off my chest, even if no one believes me. It started because I needed money and wanted to avoid my family's annual summer gathering. My Aunt Susie's constant, concerned questions about my community college education compared to my cousin Dylan's Harvard acceptance were more than I could handle this year. So when I saw Ms. Crownist's house-sitting ad with good pay, I jumped at the opportunity. Everyone in Oakbrook knows about Ms. Crownist. She's this middle-aged woman who lives alone in that big red house at the end of Maple Street. People call her eccentric, but that's just a nice way of saying they think she's crazy. She wears these elaborate Victorian-style dresses to the grocery store and talks to herself while shopping. I'd seen her around town but never actually spoken to her. When I arrived at her house that Monday morning, I was surprised by how ordinary it looked from the outside. Just a 2-story red house with some paint flaking off to reveal black wood underneath. Nothing obviously creepy about it. The lawn needed mowing, and there were some overgrown bushes, but otherwise, it was just a house. Ms. Crownist answered the door wearing a floral dress and way too much perfume. She seemed normal enough, just extremely rushed because she was late for her flight. "Mark Johnston? Good, you're on time. I don't have much time to show you around," she said, practically dragging me inside. She walked quickly through the house, pointing out the kitchen, bathroom, and the guest room where I'd be staying. "My bedroom is off limits," she emphasized, which seemed reasonable enough. Just before leaving, she handed me a folded piece of paper. "These are the house rules. Please follow them exactly." She looked me dead in the eyes when she said this. "Exactly, Mark. It's very important." I nodded, thinking she was just particular about her stuff like most homeowners would be. As she was stepping out the door, she paused. "Oh, and don't worry about the noises. The house settles at night." Then she was gone, hurrying to her cab before I could ask any questions. I didn't look at the list right away. I brought my stuff to the guest room, which was simple but comfortable. A double bed, dresser, desk, and attached bathroom. After unpacking, I made myself a sandwich in the kitchen and finally sat down to read Ms. Crownist's rules. That's when things first felt off. The paper contained not just normal stuff like water the plants or check the mail, but a whole list of bizarre instructions for specific rooms and times of day. 1. Do not enter my bedroom under any circumstances. 2. The guest bathroom is yours to use, but don't sing in the shower. Jane gets jealous. 3. If you hear knocking on the walls, ignore it. They're just saying hello. 4. Don't leave the guest room between midnight and 1 a.m. That's their playtime. 5. The stuffed lion on the bed is named Leo. Let him stay in bed with you. He protects you. 6. If you hear anyone outside your door asking if you need anything, tell them you already have room service. 7. Lucas sometimes gets clingy in the kitchen. If he won't let you leave, spray lemon juice in the air. 8. Don't look directly at the paintings in the studio for too long. 9. If something moves in your peripheral vision, keep walking and don't acknowledge it. 10. Stubby likes to hide things. If something goes missing, just ask aloud for it back. There were more, about 20 rules in total, each more bizarre than the last. Most mentioned names: Jane, Lucas, and most frequently, someone or something called Stubby. I laughed it off. Ms. Crownest was clearly just eccentric, maybe with some kind of mental health issues. I figured I'd water her weird plants, feed her cat, though I hadn't seen one yet, and enjoy having a big house to myself for 3 weeks. For the first 2 weeks, everything was normal. I followed the basic house-sitting duties, but ignored all the supernatural-sounding rules. No strange noises, no missing items, nothing unusual at all. I spent my days watching TV, playing video games on my laptop, and ordering pizza. The house was actually pretty nice once you got used to it. I did explore a bit. The house had 8 rooms total, including a studio upstairs that I found particularly interesting. It was filled with paintings, dozens of them, all featuring the same subject, a turquoise-scaled creature with disturbingly human-like hands. The paintings varied in style and setting, but that same creature appeared in every single one. Some showed it hiding in forests, others swimming in dark water, and a few depicted it sitting in this very house. I found it weird, but assumed Ms. Crownest was just really into this one imaginary character. Maybe she was working on a children's book or something. Everything changed during the 3rd week. On Monday night, I was up late watching movies when I heard it, knocking inside the walls, not like pipes or the house settling, but deliberate knocking, like someone tapping their knuckles against the inside of the drywall. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just the old house making noises, but it followed me from room to room. Tuesday morning, I woke up to find the houseplants had moved. Not just a little bit, like they'd been brushed against, but significantly. Pots that had been on shelves were now on the floor, and a fern that had been in the living room was now outside my bedroom door. I convinced myself I must have moved them while half asleep and forgotten. By Tuesday evening, things escalated. I was making dinner when I felt something brush against my leg. I looked down, expecting to finally see Miss Crownest's cat, but there was nothing there. Just as I turned back to the stove, all the cabinet doors flew open at once. Not slowly creaking open, they slammed open. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I tried to leave the kitchen, but the door wouldn't budge. I pulled and pulled, but it was like something was holding it closed from the other side. Then I remembered the rule about Lucas in the kitchen. Feeling ridiculous but desperate, I found a lemon in the fridge, cut it open, and squeezed the juice into the air. The door immediately swung open, nearly causing me to fall backward. That night, I couldn't sleep. The knocking in the walls was constant now, and sometimes I could swear I heard whispering. Around midnight, I heard giggling in the hallway, high-pitched and childlike. I remembered rule number 4 about not leaving the room between midnight and 1 a.m., and for the first time, I decided to follow it. I stayed put, listening to what sounded like multiple people or things running up and down the hallway, occasionally scratching at my door. Wednesday was when I saw it for the first time. I was walking past the studio when movement caught my eye. One of the paintings, the one showing the turquoise creature sitting on the staircase, was different. The creature wasn't in its usual spot. As I stared, trying to remember if I was misremembering the painting, I saw a flash of movement in the hallway behind me. I turned just in time to see something turquoise disappear around the corner. Giggling, I ran to the front door, determined to get out of the house, but it wouldn't open. Neither would any of the windows. I was trapped. For the next few days, I barricaded myself in the guest room, venturing out only when absolutely necessary for food and water. I pushed the dresser against the door and kept the bathroom light on at all times. The stuffed lion, Leo, that I had previously tossed in the closet was now back on the bed every time I returned to the room, no matter where I hid it. The knocking was constant now, sometimes slow and deliberate, sometimes frantic like someone desperate to get in. Objects disappeared regularly, my phone charger, my shoes, my wallet, only to reappear in strange places like inside the refrigerator or balanced on top of door frames. One night, I woke up to find something sitting at the foot of my bed. In the dim light from the bathroom, I could make out a small, hunched figure with glistening skin. When it turned toward me, I saw it had no face, just smooth turquoise skin where features should be. I screamed and it vanished, but not before I heard that same childlike giggle. I started following every rule on Ms. Crownist's list. I spoke to the empty air when things went missing. "Stubby, please give back my keys." I kept Leo on the bed. I announced, "I already have room service," when I heard scratching at my door around dinner time. And bizarrely, it seemed to help. Things would reappear, the knocking would temporarily stop, and the scratching would move away from my door. By the time Ms. Crownist was due to return, I was a nervous wreck. I hadn't slept properly in days. I'd barely eaten, and I jumped at every sound. When I heard her key in the front door, I nearly cried with relief. She took one look at me and knew. "They didn't behave, did they?" she said, not really asking. "I'm so sorry, Mark. My other residents can be mischievous with newcomers." I wanted to scream at her, to demand explanations, but I was so exhausted and frightened that all I could do was nod numbly as she wrote me a check for the agreed amount, plus what she called a disturbance bonus. "Stubby's quite fond of you," she commented as I gathered my things, trying to leave as quickly as possible. "He doesn't usually interact this much with house-sitters." I didn't respond. I just wanted out. A week later, after I'd somewhat recovered at my own apartment, I realized my phone was missing. I searched everywhere before receiving an email from Ms. Crownist. "Stubby took your phone for fun. He hid it in the studio behind the painting of himself in the garden. You're welcome to come get it any time." I never went back for that phone. I bought a new one the same day. I've ignored her follow-up emails asking if I'd be interested in house-sitting again for triple the pay. It's been 3 months now, and sometimes I still hear knocking in my apartment walls at night. I tell myself it's just pipes or neighbors, but then I'll find small objects misplaced, my keys in the freezer, my watch in a cereal box, and I'll remember that high-pitched giggle. Last week I found a small turquoise handprint on my bathroom mirror when I got out of the shower. I've started keeping lemons in every room, just in case. And sometimes, when I'm trying to fall asleep, I swear I can feel something small and cold breathing at the foot of my bed. Whatever was in that house, I think part of it followed me home, and I still can't explain any of it.